Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto takes Jiraiya talk seriously. Forget about Sasuke. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by AmunRa and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. A Promise Fulfilled. The crunch of dead leaves beneath his feet was the only sound in the vast forest that surrounded him. Whatever wildlife inhabited the forest had fled at the first sign of battle, and dead bodies now rested where squirrels and birds had before. It would take nature a long time to restore the area to what it was just a day ago. The precious burden in his arms was heavy, and it took everything he had left not to drop to his knees in exhaustion. Everything he'd done to get to this point had been worth it, and he would not allow the limitations of his body to ruin what he'd narrowly accomplished. He could only recall pieces of the battle that had just taken place. He wasn't even sure how long it had taken. It could have been hours, or days. He remembered defeating the guards that had been placed outside of the hideout, and then sneaking inside. What happened once he'd breached the main defenses was all a blur. His civilian clothing, which he'd worn because he was not on an official mission from his village, was torn and stained with blood, both his enemies and his own. His body was bruised, battered, and cut open, but he was still on his feet. If anyone had been left alive to follow him, he'd be easy to find due to the trail of blood he was leaving behind. This was his personal mission, 6 years in the making, so he'd come alone. If he'd failed, he would have died alone, leaving nothing behind to condemn his village and give the target a reason to attack it. They'd already tried that once, and had been defeated only by a narrow margin. He had no doubt that any excuse to attack again would have been pounced upon, and he loved his village too much to put it in that kind of danger. The precious burden he now carried, along with the dead bodies that littered the forest floor, were his proof that he had not failed. He only hoped that he could get them both back to the village before their injuries took their toll on them. He shifted the body of the unconscious young man in his arms so that he could look at the face. It had been so long since he'd seen it that he found himself blinking several times to make sure that the young man wasn't going to disappear. The last time they crossed paths was when Oto had attacked Konoha a year and a half ago. The young man in his arms had not been himself back then. His body had been moving, but the young man had not been the one in control. Seeing him, hearing him, watching him destroy and kill with no mercy, had torn his heart to shreds, and he had to keep reminding himself that his friend was not the one doing those horrendous deeds. His friend was probably watching from somewhere deep inside his mind, unable to stop what Orochimaru did with his body. That incident, their first confrontation since their battle at the Valley of the End, had been the turning point for him, and had reminded him of the promise he'd made Sakura when he was 12. He hadn't been able to fulfill it before Orochimaru had switched bodies again, which had thrown him into a depression where the only important things in his life were training and his missions. Jiraiya had been ecstatic to have such a dedicated and focused student, and had taught him everything he knew, which had allowed him to rise in the ranks to Jonin. The attack on Konoha, and subsequent confrontation with his friend, had made him realize that he was the only one that could change the situation. Orochimaru was a threat, and the only acceptable way to get rid of that threat involved saving his friend. No one else in the village, except for Sakura and maybe Kakashi, saw the situation the same way. The Hokage had given an order to kill Orochimaru on sight, which meant that he had to get to Orochimaru first so that his friend wouldn't suffer the consequences of that order. The research that the fourth Hokage had undertaken before he sealed the nine-tailed fox had been invaluable in finding a way to remove Orochimaru's soul from the host's body. The fifth Hokage had not given him permission to access the fourth secret scrolls, but Sakura, who worked for the fifth, had no qualms about sneaking them out for him. They'd agonized over the research for a year and a half on their own, before they'd been able to formulate a technique for the removal and destruction of Orochimaru's soul. They told no one about what they planned on doing, because what they had planned was on the level of Orochimaru's forbidden techniques, which carried a penalty of death. If he succeeded, they'd deal with the consequences later. If he failed, he would be the only one to pay the price. The pain of his knees hitting the ground forced him out of his thoughts. He hissed in pain as every limb stung with the impact. He clutched his precious burden closer to him as he attempted to keep himself from falling face first onto the ground. He had a feeling that if he fell, he would not be able to get up again, and he had a long way to go until he could get back to the village. He managed to get one leg underneath him, before the knee gave out and sent him sprawling to the ground. The young man he was carrying fell on top of him, and the young man's long, dark hair covered them both like a curtain. He gently pushed the young man off of him and laid him down on the ground beside him. He put his right hand on the young man's chest and smiled in relief when he felt the chest moving up and down with the young man's breaths. "Don't worry, Sasuke," Naruto said, his voice hoarse and almost inaudible. "I've come way too far to fail now. I'll get us home one way or another, I promise." Naruto brushed Sasuke's hair out of his face and again rested his right hand on Sasuke's chest. "I keep my promises. That idiotic, good-for-nothing, reckless, impulsive, stupid kid is going to get himself killed," Jiraiya fumed as he rode on top of Gamabunta. "I can't believe he took off on this suicidal mission by himself. What was he thinking?" "What do you expect, Jiraiya?" Gamabunta contributed in his rumbling voice. "Since when has Naruto shown any restraint when it comes to his friends? I should have seen it coming. If I hadn't managed to pull the truth out of Sakura, Jiraiya trailed off, knowing that he could already be too late in reaching Naruto. For all he knew, the young man had already been slaughtered by Orochimaru or his minions. When Naruto had failed to show up for training, which he religiously attended, Jiraiya had been concerned. After failing to find Naruto at home, he'd gone in search of Naruto's closest friend, Shikamaru, to see if he knew anything about the wayward blonde, but had discovered that the young Anbu was on a mission. He'd then tracked Sakura down, and it was through her that he'd found out about their crazy scheme to bring Sasuke back to Konoha. She had not been cooperative at first, but after Jiraiya had painted a picture of just how bad it could get for Naruto if Orochimaru captured him, and he promised not to go to Tsunade until after the mission was over, she told him. He was now on his way to Orochimaru's hideout, hoping against hope that his student was still alive. Naruto has always made it clear that he would not give up on Sasuke, Gamabunta said, breaking into Jiraiya's thoughts. You should have expected this. Jiraiya's guilt reared its ugly head, as it inevitably did when the subject of Orochimaru came up. It was, ironically enough, a conversation with Naruto that had brought even more guilt about the subject. They'd been training when the subject had come up. Naruto had been so adamant about getting Sasuke back, and Jiraiya had tried to point out to him that at 18, he was still too young and too inexperienced to stand a chance against a man like Orochimaru. He mentioned that he, Tsunade, and Sarutobi, with their combined experience, had not been able to do anything to stop him. It had been the wrong thing to say. The conversation that followed was not one that Jiraiya was ever going to forget. It's your fault, sensei. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow in amusement, and slight puzzlement, at the accusation. What exactly is my fault, oh wise Naruto, he asked. Orochimaru, the 17-year-old stated and crossed his arms over his chest. Sasuke too, he added in that tone that dared anyone to challenge him. Sasuke's defection is my fault? Jiraiya asked. While he was amused at Naruto's reasoning, he couldn't help but notice the set to Naruto's shoulders and jaw. Sasuke was a painful subject for the teenager, and he never brought it up. The fact that he was doing so now meant that whatever he had to say was something he'd spent a great deal of time thinking about, and had just been waiting for the right opportunity to bring it up. His student had grown over the past 5 years, and a great deal of maturity had come from that process. Naruto was still loud, annoying, and rash, but underneath the facade he had a sharp mind and great attention for detail. The time he and Shikamaru had spent together had rubbed off on the blonde, and Jiraiya had been surprised time and again at how much Naruto's strategic knowledge had grown. It also meant that now Naruto's arguments held substance, and couldn't be as easily dismissed. Sasuke might have been a conceited bastard with a one-track mind when it came to killing his brother, but he was not power-hungry. He didn't ask to be cursed by Orochimaru. That was done against Sasuke's will. Sasuke chose to leave the village, Jiraiya pointed out. Orochimaru didn't force him to do it, didn't he? Naruto countered. The curse seal works by altering the recipient's mind, warping what desires that person already has. Like I said, Sasuke might have had a one-track mind when it came to Itachi, but if Orochimaru hadn't placed that seal on him, he might not have felt that leaving Konoha was the only way for him to accomplish his goal. There were other ways to attain enough power to go after Itachi. Going to Orochimaru wasn't his only option, but the snake made him believe that it was. Jiraiya chose to remain silent. He had a feeling that Naruto was just getting started. He had to admit that the though had crossed his mind, though. He hadn't had many dealings with the young Uchiha, but from what Jiraiya knew of the young man, he didn't think that he had been crazy or bent on domination as Orochimaru had been. He'd survived a devastating attack on his family, his clan, that had left him traumatized and with a desire for revenge. That, in and of itself, was not all that unique. Jiraiya had harbored his own need for revenge once or twice in his lifetime, and he'd never been tempted to turn to a man like Orochimaru for that kind of power. Had the curse seal been the factor that pushed Uchiha Sasuke over the edge? You, the old lady, and the third, are responsible for Orochimaru. The statement hung in the air like a razor-sharp kunai waiting for a target. Naruto looked at him, and his eyes were that curious mixture of blue and red that he got when he was angry. At the moment the teenager in front of him looked so much like his former student that for a moment, Jiraiya forgot that he was talking to Naruto, and was instead being grilled by the man who would later become Hokage. The spell was broken when Naruto spoke once again. You knew he was insane and needed to be stopped, but you let him go. The third had a chance to kill him, to end the madness and prevent the bloodshed that he's caused, but he didn't. You had a chance to do the same, but did not. Jiraiya's anger flared at the mention of something he told Naruto one day when they'd both been slightly intoxicated from the sake Jiraiya had snuck into the training session. He'd had a moment of weakness and had revealed what he perceived as his greatest failure. Naruto had no right to throw that back in his face. I sense your anger, sensei, Naruto said. Are you angry because you know I'm right or because I don't have a right to meddle in your life? Jiraiya's jaw clenched, and he fought the urge to turn away from the teenager's stare. Orochimaru was his greatest failure, and that was still an open and bleeding wound. Don't you think I know what we've done? Jiraiya finally said. Do you think that I didn't try? Like you and Sasuke at the Valley of the End, I couldn't beat him when I tried to stop him. It was a miracle that he left me alive and I still don't know why he did. It must have been some sick sense of humor. Naruto's face darkened at the mention of what he perceived as his own greatest failure, but it was clear to Jiraiya that he was not going to back down. The difference between us is that unlike you, Tsunade, and Sarutobi, Sakura and I have taken responsibility for Sasuke. We will stop Orochimaru, Jiraiya. We will save Sasuke, or we will die trying. Hey Jiraiya, snap out of it. Gamabunta's voice forced him back to the present. What's so important that you had to space out? The Toad Boss asked. Naruto and I had a conversation about Orochimaru about a year ago, he replied. He mentioned that he and Sakura would save Sasuke, and I should have taken that to heart a lot more than I did. Knowing Naruto, I should have known that he was already planning something. The kid is gutsy and is loyal to his friends. A lot of people can learn from that. They traveled in silence until they reached the outskirts of Oto. He dismissed Gamabunta so that he could go in stealthily, and the Toad said he'd be ready to return when necessary. The first thing Jiraiya noticed when he was close enough to the hideout was that the forest was completely devoid of life. The second thing he noticed was the chakra residue. He knew that chakra well, because he trained a man that wielded it for the past 6 years. The third thing he noticed was the nauseating smell of blood and death. It hung over the forest like a shroud and he had to fight the temptation to pinch his nose in order to block out the smell. A lot of people had died here today, and he hoped that his wayward student wasn't one of them. He reached out with his senses, on the lookout for either Naruto or Orochimaru. It was a blow to the gut to find that while both chakras were still very much active, they were very close to one another. He didn't hear the sounds of battle, so he could only guess about what Naruto and Orochimaru were doing so close together. Without a second thought, he dashed off in the direction of the chakra, not caring about being detected. As close as he was, they had to have noticed him by now, so stealth no longer mattered. He'd been running for a few minutes when he came upon a clearing. In the middle of it he spotted Naruto, who took step after clumsy step in a direction only he could determine. The blonde was covered from head to toe in blood and Jiraiya couldn't tell how much of it was his own. He was carrying Orochimaru, who was either dead or unconscious. The way Naruto held on to the young man made Jiraiya think that he was unconscious and not dead. He'd have to get closer and speak to Naruto to find out why he was carrying his enemy. Naruto, Jiraiya said when he was close enough to the blonde. The young man didn't immediately respond. When he raised his head, Jiraiya noticed that his eyes were red. Erosenin, Naruto whispered, falling back on the name that he hadn't used in years. What are you doing here? Naruto looked like it was taking everything he had left to remain on his feet. His eyes were half-lidded and the hold he had on Orochimaru was shaky at best. Orochimaru's head was nestled in the crook of Naruto's neck and it took everything Jiraiya had not to reach out and fling the man aside. He would hear Naruto out first. Sakura told me about your insane plan. I came to either talk you out of it or help. Naruto's lips twitched into a ghost of a smile, and he looked down at Orochimaru. I did it, sensei. Jiraiya took a step closer to examine the unconscious man. He looked as he had the last time Jiraiya had seen him, with the exception of the numerous bruises and cuts on his face and body. Look at his chest, Naruto said. Confused, Jiraiya lifted Orochimaru's shirt until he could see the man's chest. He didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Use chakra, Naruto instructed. The Sannin did as he was told and was surprised to see a seal very similar to Naruto's appear on the right side of the chest, very close to the underarm. I was desperate, Naruto said. Orochimaru was about to kill me and I couldn't reach any other part of the body. Jiraiya removed his hand and let the shirt cover the young man's chest once again. He looked at his student one more time and couldn't find the words for what he wanted to ask. He finally settled on what came into his mind first. What does the seal do? Naruto coughed, and blood dribbled onto his chin and Orochimaru's chest. Repel, Naruto said. My seal keeps the nine-tailed fox in, this seal keeps Orochimaru out. It's just Sasuke in there now. Jiraiya reached to take the body from Naruto, but the young man wouldn't release him. What about Orochimaru? Naruto coughed again and swayed. The soul was destroyed. He couldn't get back into Sasuke, couldn't get into me, and everyone else was dead. Naruto, having finally exhausted all of his remaining strength, dropped to his knees. Jiraiya caught them both before they could fall completely, and lowered them gently to the ground. Did Sasuke wake up? Are you sure it's him? Naruto shook his head. He's been unconscious since I placed the seal on him. Naruto and Sasuke, if that really was just Sasuke, both needed urgent medical attention. Among their many other injuries, Sasuke had what looked like an injury from the Rasengan, while Naruto had an injury that looked to have been caused by the Chidori. He didn't know how Naruto was still awake and able to move, and he needed to be taken to Tsunade immediately. However, if Naruto was wrong and Orochimaru was not gone, taking Sasuke back to the village would be suicide. As if reading his thoughts, Naruto spoke. I'm right, sensei. Please trust me. Naruto's eyes were no longer red. They had returned to the clear blue they almost always were and were pleading for Jiraiya to believe him. Naruto had not had many people in his life trust him, and the Sannin had never had a reason not to trust his student. Okay, Naruto, I'll take you back to the village. Naruto nodded and finally let go of the tight control that had kept him going for who knew how long. The teenager lost consciousness, but managed to retain his hold on his friend. Jiraiya untangled Sasuke's body from Naruto's grasp and laid them both against the nearest tree. Jiraiya smoothed back Naruto's golden hair and smiled sadly. You did well, kid. You kept your promise. He summoned Gamabunta once again and immediately took off towards the village. Once they were halfway there, Jiraiya also summoned Gamakichi. Get to Tsunade and tell her to meet me at Naruto's apartment, Jiraiya instructed the smaller toad. Don't tell her why, but tell her to bring Shizen. If she starts arguing, tell her that it's about Orochimaru. Gamakichi had known Jiraiya long enough to know when to just follow orders and not waste time, so once he'd received his instructions, he simply disappeared, leaving Jiraiya alone with his thoughts and two seriously wounded teenagers. While his concern was primarily for Naruto, his eyes kept falling on Sasuke. The last time he'd seen the teenager was after Orochimaru's battle with Naruto, in which Naruto had almost been killed once again. Jiraiya had gone after his former teammate with everything he had, despite being put slightly off guard by Orochimaru's new appearance. The snake's voice and his attitude had still been the same as Jiraiya remembered, however, which had made it a little easier to fight him. His anger over what had been done to Naruto, and his guilt over how Orochimaru had turned out had taken over, and he hadn't even stopped to consider how Naruto would react if he'd succeeded in killing Orochimaru, and by association killed Sasuke. In the end, Orochimaru had retreated, leaving Jiraiya with a nearly dead student, a nearly dead jounin, and a frantic medic ninja. He'd rushed the kid and the jounin to Tsunade, and she'd worked her magic. When Naruto was recovering from his injuries, Jiraiya had promised Naruto that he wouldn't allow him to face Orochimaru on his own again. It was a promise that he hadn't been able to keep. Naruto's whimper drew Jiraiya's attention. He got closer to his student and laid a head on the kid's forehead, which was hot with fever. Jiraiya wasn't sure if Naruto was suffering from his injuries, or from the images his mind was undoubtedly supplying him with. After all, getting to Orochimaru had meant that Naruto had to get through his entire army first. The nine-tailed fox's chakra may have helped give Naruto the extra power he needed to defeat Orochimaru's minions, but Naruto was the one who would have to live with the consequences. Naruto had killed before. As a ninja, it was part of the job. Mass killings, however, were another thing entirely, regardless of the circumstances, and Jiraiya had no doubt that Naruto was going to suffer greatly over what he'd had to do. We're here. Gamabunta maneuvered them to Naruto's building, which was thankfully located towards the back, and sparsely populated, part of the village. Ironically enough, Naruto lived very close to the abandoned Uchiha neighborhood. Jiraiya had asked the kid once why he'd chosen to live so close to a place where so many people had been killed, and he said that seeing the empty houses as he came home every day reminded him of his lost friend, and the promise he'd made to Sakura. Many people believed that the place was haunted, so they steered clear of the area. Naruto liked the solitude, and Jiraiya had to admit that it came in handy once in a while. Gamabunta stopped directly underneath Naruto's balcony, and Jiraiya picked up Naruto and took him up first. He fished the keys out of Naruto's pocket and unlocked the sliding glass door. He set Naruto on the couch and went into the bedroom to get the spare futon out of the closet. He spread it out on the living room floor and then brought Sasuke inside and laid him on the futon. He dismissed Gamabunta with a promise to keep him updated on Naruto's condition, and settled down to wait for Tsunade. It wasn't long before the door to Naruto's apartment opened and Tsunade rushed in, with Shizen on her heels. The woman took one step inside, saw the occupants of the living room, and stopped. Her jaw dropped open in surprise and she started from one man to the other, until her gaze finally rested on Jiraiya. Are you insane? Why did you bring Orochimaru back here? Do you want to give him the opportunity to finish what he started a year and a half ago? Jiraiya took a deep breath and counted to 30. The wait for an answer annoyed Tsunade enough that a vein throbbed in her forehead. Once he was sure he wouldn't say something to make matters worse, Jiraiya finally spoke. Naruto took it upon himself to not only kill Orochimaru, but free Sasuke. The boy on the futon is no longer possessed. Tsunade did not immediately reply. Instead, she looked from one teenager to the other. She shook her head and clenched and unclenched her hands as if she weren't sure about what she should do first. Finally, she stepped towards Naruto and removed his bloodied shirt. Shizen, take care of Uchiha, she said, and Shizen immediately got to work. After long minutes of silence, Tsunade spoke. It looks like they almost killed each other, she said. Naruto's chest is a mess. It's a miracle he didn't go into cardiac arrest. More silence, in which medical chakra flowed, and Tsunade muttered about stupid little boys who needed to learn to follow orders and not get maimed and almost killed every year. Jiraiya found the mutterings disturbing, because they showed just how scared Tsunade was about Naruto's condition. If she was this angry, Naruto must be really bad off. Tsunade-sama, take a look at this. Both Sannin gave the medic ninja their full attention. Tsunade gasped when she got a look at what Shizen was pointing at, and Jiraiya leaned in to get a better look at what he'd only gotten a glimpse of in the forest. Naruto did this? Shizen asked Jiraiya. Yes. I wasn't present for it, but who else could have? This looks like the seal on Naruto, Tsunade whispered. How did he learn? She trailed off and then turned on Jiraiya as a thought struck her. Did you know about this? Did you condone this type of experimentation? Jiraiya held up his hands, well aware of what kind of damage Tsunade could inflict when angry. I had no idea. I had to literally pull the story out of Sakura when I became concerned after Naruto skipped training. I went after him as soon as I realized what he was going to do. Tsunade, who had already been angry, became even more so at the mention of her own student. Sakura, she hissed. I should have known. Tsunade and Shizen both returned to their healing, while Jiraiya watched them. They were the best two medical ninjas Konoha had to offer, and he greatly respected and admired both for their talents, though he never actually admitted to them. While they worked on the two teenagers, Jiraiya went to Naruto's kitchen, fixed something to keep their energy replenished, and made sure that they ate it. Hours later, well into the next day, they both sank to their knees spent. Jiraiya handed them cups of tea, which they took gratefully. They sat in tense silence until Tsunade broke it. They'll be fine, she finally said. Their bodies took a lot of damage, but with plenty of rest, they should be back to normal in a few weeks. That is, until I break every bone in Naruto's body for the stunt he pulled. She sipped her tea, and her eyes hardened as they landed on Sasuke. I want you to keep an eye on him for the time being, Jiraiya. You brought him here, so I'm making him your responsibility. He is not to leave this apartment until I have made sure that Orochimaru is indeed gone. Even without Orochimaru, Uchiha Sasuke is a missing nin and should be considered dangerous in his own right. He's lucky I didn't just let him die. Naruto would not have forgiven you if you'd done that, Jiraiya pointed out. The blonde idiot is in enough trouble already, she countered. I'll send a squad of ANBU to guard the apartment tonight, and you will tell me as soon as he wakes up. As far as Naruto is concerned, send him to my office when he wakes up. I'll take care of Sakura and Naruto at the same time. Without another word, both women left the apartment. Jiraiya stared at the closed door for a long while, half expecting it to open once again. Tsunade had been uncharacteristically restrained, which didn't bode well for any of them. All three of them were in for a showing of the woman's legendary temper once the two teenagers were up and about. He was not looking forward to that. Sighing in resignation, he went to Naruto's bedroom and removed the comforter from the bed and grabbed an extra one from the closet. He covered both boys and settled with his back against the couch Naruto was laying on, facing Sasuke. It was going to be a long night. Hey Sasuke, what are you going to do after you kill Itachi? Sasuke fought the urge to groan at the question. He ignored it in favor of regaining his breath. The spar had left him exhausted, but he was not about to show his opponent that. Every spar that he and Naruto had was better than the last, which meant that both boys ended up more beat up and even more tired. Naruto had been steadily progressing, a fact that Sasuke did not miss. His training with Jiraiya was definitely paying off, and Sasuke made a mental note to speak to Kakashi about increasing his own training. Kakashi would probably complain, but he'd just have to live with it. After all, it wouldn't be good for Sasuke's reputation if he lost to the blonde idiot. Why do you care, idiot? Sasuke managed to growl out. He bent at the waist to hide his face, but turned to the side when he heard approaching footsteps. Naruto bent as well so that they were facing each other. When Naruto had Sasuke's attention, he grinned. Come on, Sasuke, don't be such a sore loser, Naruto said. This time, Sasuke did groan. I didn't lose and you didn't win, Naruto. It's called a draw. Naruto shrugged and dropped to the ground next to where Sasuke was standing. He crossed his arms and stared up at him. So, what are you going to do? Sasuke didn't remember when they had started this, but it had become such a part of their spars that neither boy fought it anymore. As a reward for a good spar, each got to ask one question. The other boy had to answer the question, regardless of what was asked. It had started out as a dare from Naruto, and Sasuke, being a person who never backs down from a challenge, had gladly taken the dare. Now it was routine. He'd gotten to ask Naruto about the villagers' hate for him after their last spar, and while Naruto hadn't told him why the villagers hated him, which he hadn't directly asked about, Naruto had told him a few stories about things the villagers had done. Today, it was Naruto's turn to ask, and as much as Sasuke hated talking about Itachi, he was not going to back down from their unspoken deal. I don't know, Sasuke answered truthfully as he sat down beside Naruto. I haven't thought that far ahead. Since my family was murdered, all I could think of was killing Itachi. I made that my purpose in life, but I never really thought about what I would do after. Naruto regarded him for a moment, before he nodded once in acceptance of the answer. It was a long time until he spoke again. We'll be there to help you pick up the pieces, Sasuke. Count on it. The memory floated away like a feather caught in a lazy breeze, leaving Sasuke surrounded by darkness. He much preferred the darkness of his self-made prison deep inside his mind to the horrors of the outside world. Once Orochimaru had taken over, Sasuke had retained full awareness of what was going on outside of his body, without the ability to control any part of it. The death and destruction that Orochimaru liked to surround himself with sickened Sasuke, so he avoided contact with the snake as much as possible. His memories, just like every other part of him, had been tainted by Orochimaru. The snake had gained Sasuke's memories and he liked to use those to torment Sasuke, especially when he found that he could twist the memories to suit his dark pleasures. At the same time, Sasuke had gained Orochimaru's memories, which at first had displeased the snake greatly. Once he'd found out that Sasuke was disgusted by them, he'd taken great pleasure in showing them to him over and over. He especially liked to show Sasuke how he'd killed the third Hokage. Every now and then, when Orochimaru was dormant or injured, Sasuke was able to regain control of his body. When he first realized he could do it, he'd taken the opportunity to try and overpower Orochimaru. That had failed miserably, however. Once Orochimaru had learned that Sasuke was still alive and aware, he'd punished him by showing Sasuke things that would have left most grown men cowering in fear. Orochimaru also liked to inflict a great deal of pain. In the end, Sasuke retreated and Orochimaru eventually decided that it was more fun to have Sasuke around to torture than to get rid of him. It had become a game to him, and a living death to Sasuke. The sensation of warmth on his face slowly dragged Sasuke out of his train of thought. Once that one sense had been triggered, Sasuke began to feel other things, like the breeze that caressed his cheek, or the sweet smell of cherry blossoms. He had to wonder if he was not just imagining that last one. After all, Oto didn't have any cherry blossoms and Sasuke hadn't smelled one since he left Konoha. As time passed, he began to be aware of more and more things, like the dull ache in his chest and the throbbing headache. His first instinct upon realizing that he had control of his body was to retreat so as not to make Orochimaru aware of the fact, but he fought that. Curiosity got the better of him, and he wanted to see just how far he could retain control before Orochimaru realized it. He wondered what had happened to immobilize Orochimaru enough to drive him deep into his subconscious. It didn't matter though. The more he practiced precise control and manipulation, the better chance he had to regain permanent control of his body. Slowly, as if walking through a minefield, Sasuke took a deep breath and relished in the feel of his chest rising with the intake and lowering with the exhalation. He moved the fingers of his right hand and winced at the sharp pain that accompanied the movement. The breeze ruffled his hair, which tickled his cheek. He almost smiled at the sensation, but managed to catch himself in time. He was afraid to open his eyes, because he didn't want this to be just another dream or another twisted illusion. Orochimaru had tricked him with illusions similar to this before and, as much as Sasuke hated to admit it, it would wound him deeply if he fell for another one. Deciding that not knowing whether or not he was really in control was worse, Sasuke finally opened his eyes. He blinked several times to clear his vision and when he did, found himself starting at something he never thought he'd see again, the symbol of Konoha. He was so shocked at what he was seeing that he forgot all about his fear of alerting Orochimaru that he was in control. He sat up on the bed and stared at the scroll that hung on the wall beside the bed. The scroll was not very big, and the paper looked yellowed with age, but it was apparent that whoever had put it on the wall held great respect for it. Sasuke's eyes wandered around the strange room. It was bright, well lit, and colorful. It didn't look like any of the rooms in Oto. It certainly wasn't his room, because his room was underground and didn't have a window. It also wasn't Orochimaru's, or Kabuto's room, both of which he was very familiar with. He got off the bed and continued his inspection of the room, until his eyes landed on a framed photograph on top of the dresser by the window. When Sasuke reached for the photograph, he saw that his hand was shaking. He carefully examined the four people in the photograph, the teacher, with his half-covered face, the girl with her bright smile, and the two boys, one wearing a scowl and one gritting his teeth in anger. Everyone in the photo looked so young, so innocent, even though Sasuke knew that wasn't the case for anyone in that photo. When he picked up the photograph, he'd uncovered what had been placed behind it. He picked that up with his left hand and ran his finger over the scratch that bisected the Konoha symbol. He remembered the forehead protector coming loose and falling off of his head when he'd collapsed in front of Naruto coughing blood. He hadn't paid attention to it then, because it had just been one more symbol of his decision to cut ties with the village of his birth. He never expected to see it again. Distracted, Sasuke made his way to the window. It was mid-morning and the sun shone brightly into the room. The brightness had to be playing with his vision, because Sasuke thought he saw his old neighborhood in the distance. That wasn't possible, because he was not in Konoha anymore. What was going on? Where was he? Had Orochimaru found a new way to torment him? You're awake. Startled, Sasuke turned towards the sound of the voice, and almost dropped the items he was holding when he saw Jiraiya standing by the door. The Sannin regarded him carefully and didn't bother to hide the kunai he held. Sasuke didn't feel any malice towards him, however, just caution. Where am I? Sasuke asked, glad to hear that his voice was steady. If this was a dream, why would he be dreaming about Jiraiya? Sasuke had barely known the man. Then again, Orochimaru had known him very well and because of that, Sasuke did now as well. If this was an illusion, then Orochimaru was using his old teammate to remind Sasuke about his own teammate, the one he could never get along with but had somehow ended up becoming close friends with. Sasuke steeled himself for whatever was to come. He was determined not to show the snake any weakness, no matter what was thrown at him. You're in Naruto's apartment, where you've been unconscious for the past 5 days. What? Why would I be in Naruto's apartment? Sasuke asked before he could stop himself. The fact that he was talking, and Orochimaru hadn't already wrestled control back from him, should have been a sign that something was very different. Sasuke, however, was focused on whatever new game he was being forced to play. He'd learned from experience to catch on to the rules quickly or pay dearly for the consequences. Jiraiya walked more fully into the room but stopped when Sasuke took as many steps away from him. He put the kunai back in its holster, which made Sasuke aware of the fact that he was not armed. He was no match for the Sannin even if he was armed, but weapons would definitely make him feel better. He turned slightly to gauge the distance to the window and decided that if it came to it, he could always jump out of the window and run for it. Relax, I don't mean you any harm, Sasuke, Jiraiya said. Don't you remember what happened? Sasuke thought back to the last thing he remembered. Orochimaru had been disciplining a ninja that had failed a mission and Sasuke was doing his best not to pay attention. Orochimaru was giving him little choice, however, and was even allowing him to feel the man's blood on his hands as Orochimaru beat him to death. What happened to Orochimaru? Sasuke asked instead. Jiraiya's eyebrows shot up in surprise. You really don't remember? Sasuke shook his head, which brought some of his hair onto his face. He grabbed the almost waist-length strands and shuddered. Orochimaru liked long hair. Mold some chakra and look at the right side of your chest. Puzzled, Sasuke regarded the Sannin, who just shrugged. Seeing no reason why he shouldn't, Sasuke pulled off the white shirt he was wearing and molded chakra. He was surprised to see a seal appear on his chest. The seal looked familiar, but he couldn't immediately place it. Naruto pulled Orochimaru's soul out of your body, and that seal kept him out. Orochimaru is dead. The words came to Sasuke as if he was underwater, and it took him a while to digest the meaning of them. It's not a dream? Sasuke whispered. I really am in Konoha? The small seed of hope that he'd kept buried for the past 3 years suddenly blossomed, and he felt his eyes stinging with tears. He blinked them away, before he faced Jiraiya once again. I'm afraid so, kid. You're back in Konoha. Sasuke swallowed the lump in his throat and didn't speak until he was sure that his voice would not crack. If this is Naruto's apartment, where is Naruto? Jiraiya grimaced. He's probably getting chewed out by Tsunade as we speak. Get dressed, kid, you have your own appointment with the Hokage to go to. Of all the stupid, idiotic, dangerous, not to mention illegal, things that you could have done, you defied orders, created a forbidden technique, infiltrated an enemy village and brought its leader back to our village. You're lucky I don't bust you back down to Genin for your trouble. Naruto stood at attention directly in front of Tsunade's desk, even though the Hokage was not seated in her usual chair. Instead, Tsunade paced the Hokage office like a caged tiger, waiting for the right moment to pounce on whatever idiot put their hand in the cage. Sakura stood rigid beside him, also at attention. He didn't have to look at her to know that she was looking straight ahead, not at her teacher. I am sure that I don't have to remind you that your actions carry severe consequences. Tsunade paused as if waiting for either Jounin to speak up, but continued to speak when she was met with silence. She walked up to Sakura and stood directly in front of the younger woman. You abused your privileges as my student, she said. You stole classified information and used it for personal uses. She then turned to Naruto. You, young man, I can't even begin to put into words what you've done. She started another orbit around her office, almost as if she were too disgusted to look at Naruto. I got rid of Konoha's greatest threat, Naruto finally said. He understood where Tsunade was coming from. He was aware that what they had done would have consequences. He knew that she was hurt because he hadn't confided in her, and he felt guilty at having to not only keep her out of the loop, but disobey her direct orders. He didn't have to ask Sakura to know that she was fully aware of what they'd brought upon themselves, and if they'd had to do it over again, he knew that neither of them would change a thing. However, he was tired of being talked down to like a little boy. He'd done what no one else in Konoha had the guts to do, and he was going to be damned if he didn't get her to acknowledge that. Do you think I wanted you to carry all of those deaths on your shoulders, Naruto? Tsunade asked. She then turned to Sakura. You got off easy, Sakura, because you didn't have to do any of the dirty work. Naruto, however, will carry this with him until the day he dies. She was suddenly beside him, and he had to force himself not to jump at her sudden presence. He turned his head to look at her, and couldn't help but notice the anguish in her eyes. As skilled and mature as you are, Naruto, you're still only a teenager. I didn't want. She trailed off, and the anger from before was replaced by weariness. I am a ninja, Hokage-sama, he said, using the formal title that he rarely used. I am trained to kill. Tsunade laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. She walked around her desk and leaned against it. You may think that now, but later on, when you're plagued by the screams of the people you killed, you may think differently. Now was probably not a good time to mention to her that he was already starting to remember, and hear those screams in his head. He turned to Sakura, who was watching him. He gave her a smile and she returned it. Everything he needed to know was in that smile. They would not regret what they'd done, no matter what the consequences. Before they'd even started on this journey, they had decided that Sasuke was worth it. It worked out, everything turned out okay. Tsunade's eyes darkened and Naruto was tempted to jump out the nearest window. That would hardly win him any points with the irate woman, so he decided to stay where he was. I was the one that pieced you back together, Naruto, remember that. I also am not sure if your plan worked, or if we brought Orochimaru right into our midst. Naruto opened his mouth to protest that the plan had worked, that Sasuke was fine, but a slight shake of the head from Sakura kept him from actually forming any of the words. Sakura knew Tsunade's moods a lot better than he did, and he wasn't about to argue with sound advice. Tsunade sighed and dropped down into her chair. You are both suspended without pay until further notice. I am not confining you to your respective homes, but I am confining you to the village. You will not leave the village without an ANBU escort, is that understood? Yes, Hokage-sama, both Jounin said in unison. What about Sasuke? Sakura said, speaking up for the first time. Tsunade's face twisted in anger at the mention of the teenager's name, and Naruto had to wonder why the woman hated the Uchiha so much. Could it be because, for a few years, he'd been possessed by Orochimaru, whom Tsunade most definitely hated? Was it something else? He'd have to ask her about it when she wasn't so angry. I've made him Jiraiya's responsibility, the Hokage answered. I will allow him to live at his family home, but he will be confined to it until further notice. He is a missing nin and I am not taking any chances with him. If you two aid him in any way that is not approved by me, I will have you tried for treason, understand? Naruto frowned at the woman's extreme measures, but nodded his agreement. Are we allowed to talk to him at least? Naruto asked. You went through all the trouble to bring him back. Do you think I'd keep you away from him? She said. For the first time since they'd entered the office, Naruto saw a glimpse of the old Tsunade. She looked them both up and down and shook her head. After a few minutes of the scrutiny she smiled. You crazy brats, she said. I can't believe you pulled it off. No one else had the guts to try and we weren't about to let you have Sasuke killed on sight, Naruto added. We took responsibility for him. The remainder of that thought was left unspoken, but Naruto could tell that Tsunade got the gist of it anyway. He'd had the conversation about Orochimaru with her, just as he had with Jiraiya, so she knew how he felt about their lack of responsibility towards their teammate. Go on, get out of here. Go see your friend. Under no circumstances are you to tell anyone else about what happened, do you understand? I'm going to have to answer for this sooner or later, but I want to make sure that Orochimaru is really gone before I do. For now, only the three of us, Jiraiya, and the ANBU assigned to Uchiha will know. They nodded their agreement, bowed in respect and left the office as quickly as was appropriate. Once they'd gotten out into the hallway, they ran towards the exit. When they were safely outside, Sakura launched herself into Naruto's arms. I'm so glad you're okay, she said. I was so worried, and then Jiraiya showed up and I wasn't in the best state of mind to evade his questions. I'm sorry I had to tell him. Naruto hugged her back. Sakura's enthusiasm was contagious, and it brought a smile to his face. He couldn't believe that they'd pulled it off either. He'd been staring at Sasuke for hours on end, afraid that if he looked away, his former teammate would disappear. Everything still seemed very surreal to him, and he found himself in a state somewhere in between full awareness and shock. What he'd done hadn't really sunk in yet, and he wasn't sure if he really wanted it to. Don't worry about it. When Jiraiya found us, I could hardly walk. If he hadn't gotten there, Naruto trailed off. The incident, which had been mostly a blur to him when he'd left Oto, was becoming clearer. Tsunade's words earlier, about the blood now on his hands, came back to him. His dreams were already plagued with the screams and the smell of burning flesh, but he was not going to share that with her, or with Sakura. He'd done what he had to do, the road to it did not matter, only the results. Naruto, are you okay? Sakura asked. She'd released him from the hug but still held him by the shoulders. She was staring intently into his eyes and he could see worry clearly in hers. He shook his head and grinned at her. Of course I'm okay, Sakura. Sasuke is back. He's going to be pissy, and will probably brood a lot, but we'll have to deal with that too. Sakura didn't look too convinced but, thankfully, she let it go. Knowing Sakura, she'd bring it up later. How about we go back to my place and see if he's woken up yet? It's been a week. You'd think he'd be tired of sleeping by now. Sakura nodded and they began their walk towards Naruto's neighborhood. It's too bad Kakashi is on a mission with the ANBU, Naruto said. He'd want to be here too. Sakura nodded her agreement. He's going to be so shocked. I think he took Sasuke's defection pretty hard, even if he didn't admit it. Yeah. When Oto attacked Konoha last year, Kakashi and Orochimaru got into it as well, Naruto added. Kakashi got pretty beat up. Naruto shuddered at the sudden image of his former teacher lying in a pool of his own blood. Orochimaru had summoned Manda, which had bit Kakashi and had left him with most of his bones broken. If he and Sakura hadn't gotten there when they had, Kakashi would have died. I was too busy trying to keep Kakashi from bleeding to death that I didn't get to face Sasuke. I'm not sure what I would have done if I'd had to fight him. Naruto was glad that his teammate and friend had not had to go against their possessed former teammate. It hadn't been a pretty picture, especially when it was Orochimaru's vile words and actions being done with Sasuke's body. It doesn't matter anymore, Sakura. I have no doubt that this won't be easy for us or for him, but at least he's himself again. He can fight us all he wants, if he wants, as Uchiha Sasuke. Sakura gave him a brilliant smile, before she began to run. Race you to your apartment. Just try to beat me, he said and took off after her. When they reached his apartment, they both stood outside of the door for a long moment. It was worth it, right, Naruto? Sakura asked. Naruto didn't have to think about his answer at all. Of course it was worth it, Sakura. With that, Naruto unlocked the front door. He didn't get very far inside the apartment, because standing in front of him, dressed in one of his sweatpants and old t-shirts, was Sasuke. The young man looked surprised to see Naruto, until his eyes became expressionless, his face a mask of indifference and aloofness. The mask hadn't been put in place fast enough and Naruto hadn't missed the suspicion that momentarily touched Sasuke's eyes. They stood there for what seemed like an eternity, staring at each other. Hi Sasuke. It was Sakura that broke the silence. Chapter 2, Hope is a Waking Dream. Hi Sasuke. The greeting hung in the air for a couple of minutes and Sakura thought that he wasn't going to return it or acknowledge that she had even said anything. Sasuke was instead staring intently at Naruto as if nothing else existed for the young man. Naruto returned the stare just as intently. If Sakura hadn't known better, she would have said that they were communicating through telepathy. Finally, Sasuke looked away from Naruto. Hello Sakura, he said and gave her his full attention. His voice was a shock to her, because it had been a long time since she'd heard it without the taint of Orochimaru's voice. It was deeper than when he'd left, and Sakura was surprised to find that his voice no longer had the same effect on her that it once had. The crush she'd had on Sasuke had been long forgotten. Instead, he'd become a friend to her, someone she missed and needed to have in her life. Now that he was back, it felt as if a piece of her heart had finally been returned to her. Sasuke addressed her formally, as he always had, and she had to resist the urge to run up to him and give him a hug. Sasuke hadn't been a very tactile person when he was 12 and Sakura doubted that he'd become one during his time with Orochimaru. His stare was still as intense as it always had been and he held himself rigid, shoulders tense, with his arms at his sides and his hands clenched into fists. Sakura smiled brightly at him, but he did not return the smile. How are you feeling? She asked. I'm fine, he replied. Are you sure? Naruto asked, speaking up for the first time. You were pretty badly injured when we got back. Sakura is a very skilled medical ninja. She could give you a quick checkup. Sasuke shook his head. That's not necessary, Naruto. I feel fine. The three of them stood there, not a half-meter from each other, but it felt as if a deep chasm was separating her and Naruto from Sasuke. She didn't know what to say and Naruto, who could normally be counted on to make conversation in any situation, was not saying a word. Sasuke, for his part, seemed only marginally interested in them, as one would marginally be interested in a stranger they ran into on the street. There was no relief or happiness in his eyes, and Sakura wondered whether he even wanted to be here. Unlike the rest of the village, she and Naruto had never written Sasuke off. They'd been hurt that he had chosen power and his need for revenge over their friendship, but at the same time, they'd also realized that he had not been himself. Getting him back was never a question for them, regardless of everyone else's opinions on the matter. When she'd found out that they'd been too late to stop Orochimaru from transferring bodies, she'd been heartbroken. It was a blow, because they'd been unable to do anything in the 3 years they'd had to find Sasuke and bring him back. It was a personal failure unlike anything else she had ever experienced, and it had left her crippled for a long time. Naruto had taken the news much worse than she had. He'd left the village for a year afterwards to train with Jiraiya, leaving her alone to deal with the aftermath of their failure. Even when he'd returned, he hadn't been the same. She saw him rarely, and when she tried to talk to him, he'd smile and nod and pretend that everything was okay, when she could clearly tell that he was lying. He was gone from the village a lot then too, because Tsunade would assign him solo missions that lasted weeks, even months. When he was back in the village, he retreated to his own apartment, or to Jiraiya's or Irika's. The attack on Konoha had brought them together once again. They'd had to face Sasuke for the first time since Orochimaru had claimed his body, and they had almost lost Kakashi and Naruto in the ensuing battle. The village had managed a narrow victory, but at the loss of countless of excellent and experienced ninja. Others like Asuma, Irika, Shikamaru, and Neji had been left near death. Irika's brush with death had rattled Naruto, and Sakura could not recall ever seeing her former teammates so helpless and lost. Fortunately, all four had pulled through and recovered fully. Genin had become Chunin and Chunin had become Jounin in the aftermath of the battle. Sakura herself had earned her promotion due to her actions during the battle. Naruto's promotion had come a bit later, but was no less deserved. Orochimaru's name had never been so hated, so cursed, and it killed Sakura that now the villagers had Sasuke's face to associate with the death and destruction that accompanied the attack. Seeing Sasuke had brought Sakura and Naruto together again, and after Naruto recovered, they'd both vowed to try again to go after Sasuke. The stakes were much higher, and they'd be paying a much steeper price for disobeying the Hokage's orders, but they were willing to take the risk. Looking at Sasuke now only confirmed to her that it had all been worth it. Jiraiya, who had retreated to the background, but was no doubt paying attention to every word, cleared his throat. He doesn't remember what happened. What? Naruto exclaimed. He clapped a hand over his mouth as if realizing that he'd said something wrong, but Sakura couldn't think of what it could be. His eyes traveled to Jiraiya, then Sakura, before they settled on Sasuke. Sasuke's fingers clenched and unclenched, and Sakura couldn't tell whether it was due to nervousness or something else. Now that she thought about it, she realized that Sasuke was being very tactile. He had moved to stand next to a wall, and the fingers of his left hand would occasionally brush the surface of the wall. When she first walked in, he'd been brushing his hands down the legs of the sweatpants he wore. On anyone else, it would have looked like the person was fidgeting, but Sakura had never known Sasuke to fidget. What do you remember, Sasuke? Sakura asked. Not much, just waking up here. Needless to say, I never thought I'd be back. His tone was cold, detached, as if he could care less whether he was here or back in Oto. Sakura didn't understand why he was being so cold. Wasn't he glad to be with them? They'd had 6 years of separation, and they had all changed. Could he have changed so much that she and Naruto had completely misjudged him and his desire to return? So what do you think of being back? Naruto asked. Sasuke turned to the blonde, and the look on his face made Sakura think of Orochimaru. There's not much to say. It's Konoha. Sakura's jaw dropped at the cold indifference in the statement. Naruto's jaw audibly shut, and when she turned to him, she could see the muscles in his jaw working. The blonde was never at a loss for words, and right now seemed no different. The only difference was that Naruto was forcing himself not to say whatever had come to mind. How can you say that, Sasuke? Sakura asked and took a few steps closer to him. Jiraiya was suddenly beside her. She'd forgotten about the Sannin and his appearance made her jump slightly. I'll leave you kids to your reunion, he said. I'm going to go get the Hokage so she can have her chat with Sasuke. He was gone before either could say anything. The three teenagers stood in uncomfortable silence, until Naruto finally spoke up. I'm hungry. The Hokage made me skip breakfast, so how about I make us something to eat? Sure, that'll be great. Sakura replied with cheerfulness that she did not feel. Naruto turned to her and gave her a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Okay, was all Sasuke said. While Naruto went into the kitchen to make whatever he was going to make, Sakura motioned for Sasuke to take a seat. He sat on one end of the couch, while Sakura chose the other end. Again, she noticed that his hand was absently running his fingers over the fabric of the couch. Do you feel any dizziness or drain in chakra? Sakura finally asked, keeping her voice as neutral as she could and trying not to think about the fact that Sasuke didn't want to be with them. We weren't sure how much of it the seal would take and I just want to make sure that you're okay. Sasuke frowned momentarily as he thought about what he'd been asked. There is no dizziness and my chakra levels seem to be where they have always been, he answered. I don't feel any effects from the seal. Sakura didn't believe him, not entirely anyway. He was hiding something, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. He didn't look ill and he wasn't pale or running a fever, but he had to be feeling some adverse effects. Then again, the kind of effects Sasuke would be feeling after being separated from Orochimaru he more than likely would not share with anyone. Are your senses okay? Sasuke turned to her, confusion clear on his face. Why do you ask that? His voice, which had previously held no emotion at all, now held a hint of suspicion. You keep touching everything and your fingers are twitching. I was just wondering if your senses were operating normally or if the seal had done something to them. Sasuke looked at the hand that had been tracing the fabric of the couch as if seeing it for the first time. He put his hands in his lap, and Sakura could tell that he was doing his best not to clench them into fists. Tell me what's wrong, Sasuke. I can help. Sasuke shook his head and let it drop slightly, so that his hair covered his face. All Sakura had a view of now was long, silky hair and tense shoulders. The silence stretched out for so long that Sakura thought he wasn't going to reply. When he did, his voice was barely audible. It's been a while since I've been able to touch anything, he said, for the first time sounding like the Sasuke she used to know and not the detached person he'd been since she'd walked into the room. Sakura's eyes filled with tears at the wistful tone in Sasuke's voice, and she knew that it had taken a lot for him to admit that much to her. She was about to reassure him, to tell him that he didn't have to worry about that anymore, but he beat her to it. My senses are fine, Sakura, it's just been a while since I've been in control of them. He did clench his hands into fists then, and Sakura reached out, and took one of them in both of her hands. Sasuke immediately tried to pull away, but Sakura wouldn't release the hand. He raised his head, mouth open to tell her to let go, but something in her eyes must have gotten to him, because he didn't say a word and he stopped fighting her hold. You're not alone, Sasuke. You never were. We were always here for you, with you. It was just a matter of you letting us in. Sasuke's jaw clenched, and he jerked his hand out of Sakura's grasp. He stood up and paced the small space that was Naruto's living room. You have no idea, Sasuke finally said. He turned to face her, and while his face was calm, his body language said otherwise. A medical ninja of her caliber would not miss the speed of his heart, the sweat on his hands or the slight, almost unnoticeable, trembling of his body. Sasuke was like a coiled snake, ready to pounce on anything he perceived as a threat. Do you have any idea of what you brought back? He asked. Sakura thought that he was asking a rhetorical question, but the expectant look on his face told her that he wanted an answer. She didn't have to think very long to give it. We brought back our friend, she said. That's where you're wrong, Sasuke replied and continued his pacing. Sakura felt his chakra spiking and she felt Naruto's doing the same in the other room. Her own rose to match, and if the levels got any higher than they were now, it would draw the ANBU into the room, and that would be the worst possible thing right now. I'm not the person that I was 6 years ago. You didn't bring back your friend, you just brought back a hollow shell. Sakura's tears spilled down her cheeks and she was momentarily left speechless at the venom in Sasuke's voice. The saddest part of it was that the venom was not directed at her or at Naruto, but at himself. If you're not our friend, then who are you, an imposter? Naruto asked. Both Sakura and Sasuke turned to look at the blonde, who stood at the threshold to the small kitchen area. He was wearing a white apron with a yellow smiley face printed on it, and Sakura almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. You look like Sasuke and you sound like Sasuke. To me that says that you are Sasuke, Naruto added. We've all changed, Sakura added. We're not what we used to be. You didn't spend the last 3 years murdering countless people, Sasuke insisted. You don't have all that blood on your hands. We're ninjas, Sakura said. We all have blood on our hands. Besides, you didn't spend the last 3 years murdering people, Orochimaru did. Yeah, Naruto added. If there's anyone that has blood on their hands, it's me, he said, his voice suddenly subdued. I killed everyone in Oto. Sasuke raised an eyebrow at the admission and Sakura lowered her head in guilt. She should have gone with him. She should share some of the responsibility for what he'd had to do. When she raised her head, Sasuke's eyes were wide. Everyone? He asked. Naruto nodded. His blue eyes were shadowed and he looked away from both of them. They were in the way, was all he said. Silence descended over them like a shroud. Naruto went back to cooking and Sasuke retook his seat on the couch. When he looked at Sakura, she could clearly see the disbelief on his face. He went by himself? Sasuke asked in a much softer, much calmer tone. Why? Sakura took a deep breath and wiped the tears from her cheeks. We knew that there was a large possibility that we would fail and would end up captured, tortured, and killed. That's why Naruto insisted that he go alone. I would have been the best choice to perform the seal, but he didn't want to risk my capture, so he learned to do it himself. The plan was that if he was captured, he would kill himself in a way that would destroy his body so Oto would have no reason to attack Konoha in retaliation. If he succeeded, we'd have you back. If we failed, he would pay the price alone. Sakura broke off as more tears flowed down her cheeks. Why, Sakura? Sasuke asked. Why would you do this? I left the village of my own free will. I turned my back on all of you, especially you when you tried to get me to stay. Why would you bother? Sakura clasped her hands together to keep them from shaking and the look of confusion on Sasuke's face served to bring more tears. Why didn't he see how important he was to them? Why couldn't he understand why they'd risk everything they had to bring him back? You're our friend, Sasuke. Naruto, who'd come into the room, answered for Sakura. I told you at the Valley of the End that I'd bring you back, even if I had to break every bone in your body to do it. It took me a little longer than expected, and I didn't have to break every bone in your body, but I kept my promise. We miss you, Sakura added. It's just not the same without you. Sasuke stared from one to the other, and Sakura was sure that he was trying to put together what they'd said and whatever was going through his head. She could still feel his anxiousness, but it was not as pronounced as it had been only moments before. He was still tense, but she didn't think he would strike at the next available target. Breakfast, or rather lunch, is ready, Naruto said. We should eat before it gets cold. So? Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. So what? Tsunade sighed. You know what I'm talking about, Jiraiya. Jiraiya chose to ignore his longtime friend in favor of looking at a pair of young ladies that were walking on the street ahead of them. He could feel Tsunade's eyes on him, but chose to let her stew for a moment longer. His view of the lovely ladies was suddenly replaced by the stars caused by Tsunade's fist colliding with the back of his head. Watch it, woman, you're going to crack my skull. I doubt that, she replied. I don't think anything can crack that thick head of yours. Now what do you think? Dropping all pretenses, Jiraiya sighed again. He picked up the pace a little bit so that they could distance themselves from the crowd. Not that they'd have to worry about it very much, since everyone who saw Tsunade bowed, muttered a respectful Hokage and then moved out of the way. He didn't want to take any chances, though, and waited until they were on the street that led to Naruto's apartment to speak. He's scared, Jiraiya said. He's trying very hard to cover it, but he's terrified. Tsunade thought over what he'd said for a long while before she replied. So you don't think it's an act? You don't think Orochimaru is pretending to be Sasuke just to get under our skin? Orochimaru isn't that good at pretending he's weak, Jiraiya added, bitterness in his voice. You know how vain he is. If we had him in Naruto's apartment instead of Sasuke, he would have attacked as soon as he'd woken up, not looked around Naruto's bedroom as if he were afraid that if he blinked it would disappear. Tsunade stopped her brisk walk and turned to Jiraiya. What do you mean? He's suspicious, Jiraiya elaborated. He's expecting us to hurt him. Well, not us, exactly. I have a feeling that he thinks this is all a trick Orochimaru came up with to either test him or torture him. I can't read Sasuke as well as I can read Naruto, but that's my gut feeling. Why would he think that? Think about it. Orochimaru was probably not happy to find out that the kid's mind survived the body transfer. If you were Orochimaru, how would you torture Sasuke? I don't claim to understand how his forbidden technique works, but if you could torture the person you've subjugated, what better way would there be than to show him memories of his home, a home he would never return to? Uchiha might not have wanted to come home, Jiraiya. We can't operate from the assumption that he was an unwilling participant in all of this. Uchiha Sasuke did leave this village voluntarily. Jiraiya examined the stern set to Tsunade's face and wondered if she was playing devil's advocate because, as Hokage, it was her job to consider both sides, or because she really did believe that Sasuke had been a willing participant. Tsunade was not cold-hearted, as much as she liked people to think that she could be. She was a kind, decent woman, who sometimes felt a little too much and got a little too attached. That could be part of the issue now. Sasuke's defection put Naruto through hell. Is that why you're so angry with him? He's a traitor, Jiraiya. How else do you expect me to treat him? I gave orders to have him killed on sight, remember? Orders that Naruto and Sakura both chose to ignore. Jiraiya resumed their walk towards the mostly deserted part of the village. Tsunade followed him shortly after. Would you have given the order to kill him on sight if he'd simply been Uchiha Sasuke, missing Nin? Tsunade did not immediately reply, and Jiraiya didn't turn around to see her face as she pondered the question. She would give him an answer when she was ready. No, she finally said. Naruto would have defected himself to keep us from killing Uchiha. Jiraiya smiled even though Tsunade couldn't see him. She could pretend all she wanted that the blonde ninja didn't mean anything to her, but he knew better. Naruto had gotten away with things that most ninjas would have been jailed or executed for. Tsunade still liked to pretend that she didn't care, even though she smiled every time she saw that damned necklace on him. Orochimaru is no longer an issue, Tsunade. Talk to the kid and make your own decision. Naruto's apartment came into view, and without making sure that she actually went inside, Jiraiya disappeared. Know it all, Tsunade murmured as the white-haired Sannin left. She stood just outside of the building Naruto lived in and took a deep breath. Having Jiraiya's opinion meant a great deal, because she knew he wouldn't be biased. He had no reason, other than Naruto, to give a damn about Uchiha one way or another, so he had no reason to lie. Naruto and Sakura were going to be a little more biased, which is why she'd left Uchiha as Jiraiya's charge. Even Kakashi would be biased when he returned. She wasn't sure if she was looking forward to telling him the news. Leave it to Naruto to bring even more trouble to her doorstep. When was that kid going to learn to listen to his superiors and do as he was told? She was still tempted to bust him down, maybe to Chunin instead of Genin, but she didn't think she'd have the heart to. Orochimaru had never meant enough to her for her to sacrifice anything for him. If it had been Jiraiya that had defected, however, would she have disobeyed Sarutobi's orders and gone after him anyway? She was glad she hadn't had to find out. She made her way up the rusty steps and knocked on the door to the apartment. She had asked Naruto to move to a safer, and more populated, part of town, but he'd refused every single time. He made more than enough money now to afford a better place, but he said he wanted to be away from the prying eyes of the village. She could understand that, even though the villagers didn't hate him as they once did. He saved their collective behinds one too many times to leave any doubts about his loyalty in their minds. Bringing back Uchiha, however, was going to put that to the test. Tsunade had a feeling that the villagers were going to be only too happy to have another target for their bigotry, anger, and hatred. Since when do you knock? Naruto said as he opened the door. We felt both you and Jiraiya standing out there for quite a while, and we were beginning to wonder what you were doing, he added, a mischievous glint in his eyes. She smacked him upside the head hard enough to make him stumble into the apartment. Watch your mouth, brat. You're in enough trouble already. She entered the apartment to a sight that, under any other circumstances, would have made her smile. Sakura and Uchiha were seated around the small table in the kitchen, which held various dishes of rice, steamed vegetables, and steamed fish. The smell alone made her stomach growl, and she realized that she'd been so busy she'd forgotten her own lunch. Join us for lunch, Hokage-sama, Sakura said from the table. Yeah, it sounds like you need it, Naruto added. Tsunade had come to interrogate and examine Uchiha, not for a visit. However, this would give her the opportunity to watch him and see how he related to his former teammates. You could see more from a person by the way he or she performed mundane tasks than by talking to them, and Naruto had just given her the perfect opportunity to observe Uchiha. She looked right at Sasuke, to see if he would say anything, but he remained silent. He met her gaze and held it. She couldn't see much in his eyes from this distance, but she didn't sense malice or murderous intent from him. She sensed his uncertainty, and his chakra tickled her skin like a soft breeze, but other than that, it was as if she were looking at a normal, 18-year-old kid, not one who had, until recently, been host to one of the most sinister human beings in history. I think I will join you, Tsunade said with somewhat forced cheer and made her way to the table. Sakura got up to get a plate and a cup of tea for her, and Tsunade deliberately took Sakura's place beside Sasuke. Sakura didn't say anything, simply moved her plate to the only empty seat on the other side of Naruto. They ate in silence, which suited Tsunade just fine. Sakura was jumpy and kept glancing at her every once in a while. The girl's guilt was very apparent, and Tsunade almost felt guilty for being so hard on her in her office earlier. The guilt diminished, however, when she remembered just what Sakura had done. Sneaking those scrolls out of the library, where they could have been lost or seen by anyone else, had been incredibly foolish, not to mention dangerous. Sakura herself had no business looking at those scrolls, and Tsunade wasn't about to let her student forget that. Naruto seemed tired, and Tsunade had to wonder if the teenager was getting any sleep. He smiled when he caught her looking at him, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't eating much of what he had on his plate, but was doing a very good job of making the rice look like the Hokage mountain. Uchiha was stiff beside her. His food was untouched on his plate, even though he was holding a pair of chopsticks. He was looking down at his food, but every now and then she caught him glancing at her through the curtain of his long hair. He would glance at Sakura and Naruto as well, and Jiraiya's words from earlier replayed in her mind. The hand that was not holding the chopsticks was in Uchiha's lap, and Tsunade could see the fingers twitch like hers sometimes did when she wanted a weapon to hold but didn't have one available. She didn't sense malice in him, so if he wanted a weapon, it was to protect himself from them. I don't think we're going to be eating anymore, Naruto suddenly said and gestured at their food, which sat mainly untouched. Should we get down to business? Tsunade sighed. Leave it to the blonde to get right to the point. Could you and Sakura leave? Tsunade asked. Huh? Naruto said. This is my apartment. Yes, and I'm your superior. You will do as I ask for once, she added. Naruto and Sakura both looked appropriately guilty at that. Fine, Naruto said. I'm going to walk Sakura home. Sakura looked like she wanted to say something, but thought better of it. They left the dishes on the table and quickly made their way out the door, leaving just the two of them. Could you come into the living room? She asked. Uchiha nodded. As he got up from his chair, his hair fell forward and hid his features. For a split second, he looked like Orochimaru when he'd been a teenager, and she shuddered at the memory. She hoped Uchiha had plans to cut his hair sometime soon. How much trouble are they in? Uchiha asked as he took a seat on the couch. They're in a lot of trouble, Tsunade replied. They broke every conceivable rule to do what they did, and they're going to be punished for it. Tsunade paused to gauge his reaction and was surprised to find a little guilt in his eyes. For now, they've been suspended, and I'm seriously considering reducing their rank a level or two. I'm not sure what the council is going to do with them, or what they're going to want to do with you. Uchiha nodded once again. His face was unreadable, and she had to grit her teeth to keep from yelling at him to show some emotion. Naruto was an open book, to her at least, and to an extent, so was Sakura. Hell, so was almost everyone else she was surrounded by. Uchiha had perfected the mask he wore, however, and with the exception of a few fleeting seconds, she could read nothing on his face. It was a good thing that she was as good as she was, however. There was nothing Uchiha could hide from her. I don't have to tell you how this village treats missing neens, do I? Uchiha shook his head. Good, then you know what would normally be done to you, especially considering that up until a week ago, you were Orochimaru. I understand, Uchiha said in a perfectly calm and level tone. It is within your right to kill me if you so desire. Tsunade took a breath and counted to 10. He was infuriating, to say the least. It didn't help that he had the same attitude of superiority that Orochimaru had. She was tempted to shake him until he showed some emotion, but instead settled for sitting next to him so that their faces were level with each other. Do you want to die? Indecision flashed over his eyes so fast that Tsunade almost missed it. Even if she had, the spike in his chakra was impossible to miss. It doesn't matter, he finally said. If you want to kill me, you will. It matters to me. Do you want me to kill you? The mask suddenly dropped from Uchiha's face as if invisible strings had been cut. He released the breath he had been holding and his shoulders slumped slightly. The eyes that had previously told her nothing now told her that he was confused and tired of trying to guess what her motives were. For the first time since she'd walked into the apartment, he looked like the person he was supposed to be, not what Orochimaru had made him into. Sympathy pulled at her heart despite her best efforts to cover it with anger and hatred. Without conscious thought, she put a hand on his shoulder and gave it a slight squeeze. I'm real, Sasuke, she said. I'm not going to disappear. His eyes widened slightly and he didn't bother to hide his surprise at having his thoughts voiced. After staring at her for a long moment, he spoke. I'm beginning to believe that none of you are going to go away and be replaced by that bastard's sadistic laughter, he finally said, his voice no louder than a whisper. He looked away from her and hid behind the curtain of his hair once again. She removed the hand from his shoulder after giving it another slight squeeze. She thought that he'd said everything he had to say, but he surprised her once again. I don't know what to do, he said. Tsunade's throat constricted and tears threatened to fill her eyes, but she fought them off. Start by answering the question. Do you want to die? He thought about it for a long moment, and when the answer came, there was no hesitation in his voice. No. I don't want to die. That could have gone worse, Sakura said. They were seated on the porch of Sakura's small house, enjoying the afternoon breeze. Yes, it could have, Naruto replied. It can still get out of control, though. You know better than anyone how Tsunade gets when she feels betrayed. Yes, I know. Ninjas who betray their village are below scum in her eyes, and she hates Sasuke even more because of Orochimaru. Naruto winced at the certainty in Sakura's voice, even though what she was saying was nothing new to him. She knew Tsunade better than he did, and he was sure that Sakura's insistence in Sasuke's return was a very sore point between the two women. It was a sore point between Tsunade and Naruto as well. Tsunade had tried to convince him, time and time again, that he was wasting his time and was better off moving on and forgetting that Sasuke ever existed. The subject inevitably caused an argument, and it got to the point that Naruto never mentioned it again. He was sure that Tsunade had thought he'd finally given up on the idea, which explained why she'd been seething when they talked to her after they brought Sasuke back. Tsunade wasn't the only one against the idea of Sasuke returning. Oto's attempt to invade Konoha a year and a half ago had sealed Sasuke's fate in the eyes of the villagers. Sasuke's face was the one that they now associated with Orochimaru, and being the small-minded and judgmental people that they were, they hadn't bothered to stop and think that Sasuke was not the one giving the orders. Since that narrow victory, Sakura and Naruto had been ostracized even more for their loyalty to the renegade Uchiha, even by a few of the people they called friends. The scorn had hurt Sakura deeply, and she'd become a much more reserved and private person. Unlike Sakura, however, Naruto was used to the village's hatred and disdain, so he let it roll off his shoulders as he had ever since he could remember. Despite the extenuating circumstances, Sasuke was still a wanted criminal, and it was going to take a miracle to keep him from being executed for those crimes. Naruto had no doubt that Tsunade could pull off that miracle, but she had to be inclined to do so first. Tsunade is stubborn, Naruto finally said. Orochimaru has always been a thorn in her side, just as he was in Jiraiya's. Sakura looked hopeful at his words. Jiraiya-sama seemed okay with Sasuke. I mean, I didn't sense or see any resentment or anger from him. If he can get over it, do you think Tsunade-sama can too? Jiraiya is a lot more laid back than Tsunade, Naruto said. He forgives a lot quicker than she does. Sakura's expression crumbled and Naruto wished he could take back his words just so he didn't have to see that look of hopelessness on her face. Who knows, Naruto added. Tsunade isn't unreasonable. I think she'll come around. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts, until Naruto had to ask the question he'd wanted to ask since they'd left his apartment. What do you think of him? Naruto asked. What do you mean? Sakura asked, clearly confused. What do you think of Sasuke? How do you see him? Sakura thought about the question as she nervously chewed on a fingernail. Naruto waited patiently for her answer, even though he was eager to hear her reaction to their friend. I'm not an expert on all things Sasuke, even though I claimed myself to be when I was 12, Sakura finally said, her eyes watering at the thought of the long-forgotten crush she used to have on the reclusive Uchiha. However, from what I observed in your apartment today, I'd say that he's as close to the edge as he's going to get. I can't claim to understand what he's going through, or what being back here means to him, but he's not handling it well. Naruto felt his insides turn cold at the statement, because he noticed the same thing. Did you feel his chakra? Naruto asked. Sakura nodded. It's different. Sasuke's chakra became tainted when Orochimaru put the curse seal on him during the Chunin exam, Naruto said. Now, it's not just tainted, but completely transformed. It's like feeling Orochimaru's chakra tainted with Sasuke's. I was surprised at how well Tsunade-sama reacted to that, Sakura said. It's not only the chakra though, Sakura added, returning to what they were talking about. I've never seen Sasuke as off-center as I saw him today. What do you mean off-center? Naruto asked. He's like a rubber band that's stretched past its limit, Sakura elaborated. If we pull it a little further, it's going to snap and hit the closest thing to it. Naruto didn't have a counter-argument to that. Do you think we made a mistake, Naruto? Naruto's eyes widened at the question and Sakura lowered her head. Why do you ask? He said. She took a deep breath. When she raised her head to meet his eyes, she was crying. What if he didn't want to come back? What if Sasuke was fine where he was? Naruto felt anger welling up inside of him, and he smothered it before he could lash out at Sakura. I refuse to believe that, Sakura, Naruto said, his voice low. I refuse to believe that Sasuke would have been better off being Orochimaru's host. I'm not saying that he would have been better off, Naruto. I'm saying that maybe that's what Sasuke wanted. Naruto vehemently shook his head. He got to his feet and paced the length of the small porch. How can you even think that, Sakura? What makes you think that Sasuke would like being Orochimaru? Even in his worst times, Sasuke was never sadistic. Then why isn't he happy to be here? Sakura said as her voice rose in a higher, more desperate pitch. Why does he look at us as if we're ghosts, or fragments of his imagination? Why is he afraid of us? Naruto stopped pacing and sat down beside her. The same questions had gone through his head, and he didn't have any answers. I don't know, Sakura. I'm tempted to shake him until he starts talking, but I have a feeling that if I come near him, he's going to attack me, he said. I don't know what else to do, but I refuse to believe that we made a mistake. He's better off here, with us. Sakura nodded, but he could tell that she wasn't convinced. Weariness suddenly seeped into every fiber of his being, and he felt as if were being weighed down. He rested his head on his knees and waited for the worst of it to pass. The rustle of leaves to their right brought Naruto's head up in alarm. Sakura stiffened beside him, until they both recognized the person's chakra. A few moments later, they were greeted by the sight of a blonde woman with long hair and piercing blue eyes. Hi Ino, Sakura said with forced cheer as soon as Ino had stepped off the path that led to Sakura's house. What brings you here? Ino looked from Naruto to Sakura, a frown on her face. Why do you two look so glum? She asked. Not that you aren't always glum these days, but it seems worse today. Naruto chuckled and stood up. You know Sakura, he said. She's always worried about something, especially when Tsunade makes her work late. Ino wasn't buying the explanation, but Naruto didn't care. She was Sakura's friend, so Sakura could deal with her. I need to head back home. I'll see you tomorrow, Sakura. Sakura looked like she wanted to say something else, but wisely refrained. Sure, I'll see you tomorrow, Naruto. With one last look at the two women, Naruto disappeared. He was finally alone. Well, he wasn't entirely alone, because he could feel the 3 ANB that were stationed around the apartment. He was alone inside of the small dwelling, however. Tsunade had finally left after he'd answered her question, and she had made sure that he was healing as expected. She'd left him with a cryptic statement, which he thought about for a while after she'd left. You've just given me a lot more work, Uchiha Sasuke, but I'll be damned if I let Orochimaru take one more victim. The memories he had of Tsunade from Orochimaru were contradicting. The snake Sannin had both admired and despised her. He had admired her because of her healing abilities, which he'd almost managed to blackmail her into using on him, and despised her because he saw her compassion as a weakness. Sasuke did not know her and didn't want Orochimaru's view of her to color his own. It was hard to separate, however, because when he saw her, he felt as if he'd known her for decades. He didn't mention that to her though, because he had a feeling that it would just remind her, once again, who he had been and what he now carried in his mind. Sasuke had remained on Naruto's couch long after the Hokage had left. He pulled his knees up to his chest and rested his head on them to fight off the raging headache that had developed when Tsunade had walked into the apartment. He didn't doubt the fact that he was really in Konoha anymore. However, he wished that he could remember what had happened. Knowing what transpired between Orochimaru and Naruto would make his current situation seem more real. But he could no longer deny the fact that he was finally free. Thinking about his situation brought thoughts of Naruto. Years ago, Sasuke would have been green with envy at the thought that his former teammate and rival had been able to master a technique powerful enough to defeat Orochimaru. Their fight on the rooftop was proof of how blind he'd been and how unfair he had acted towards his teammate. Sasuke hadn't been able to see past his own desire and his self-appointed purpose in life, to acknowledge that his friend had grown and changed for the better. He had left Konoha without speaking to Naruto again, having held his improvement against him. Sasuke was a very different person than he had been when he'd left Konoha. His time training under Orochimaru, dealing with the ninja from Oto, and then his time spent with Orochimaru in his body, had taught him a different perspective on life. The things that had seemed so important to him when he was 12 were no longer of any consequence. The rivalry he and Naruto had once shared and the jealousy that he'd harbored towards the blonde ninja seemed trivial now. Sasuke no longer knew who Naruto was. The fact that the blonde ninja had been able to walk into Oto and walk out with Sasuke was proof of that. The door to the apartment opened, but Sasuke didn't bother to raise his head, since he'd recognized Naruto's chakra when it had appeared outside. He heard a couple of loud thumps, before the spot on the couch next to him was no longer empty. Naruto shifted a moment, before finally settling into a comfortable position. The fluctuations in Naruto's chakra told Sasuke that Naruto was either upset or anxious about something. Sasuke decided to wait until the blonde told him what it was, since Naruto was usually very vocal about his feelings. When minutes passed and Naruto remained quiet, Sasuke decided to break the silence himself. What happened in Oto? He asked. The question was muffled by his knees, but the sudden rise in Naruto's chakra alerted Sasuke that the other ninja had heard the question. I don't remember, was all Naruto said. Sasuke raised his head and was surprised to find Naruto staring at him. His face was absolutely unreadable, which seemed wrong to Sasuke. Naruto was loud, obnoxious, and transparent. He wasn't supposed to be composed and secretive. You don't remember? Sasuke asked, his incredulity evident in his voice. You don't remember either, Naruto countered. There's a reason for my loss of memory, Sasuke said. The Hokage seems to think that the seal screwed with my head a little while pulling Orochimaru's soul out of my body. Naruto raised an eyebrow. He'd apparently not known about that. There's a reason for my lack of memory too, he finally said. Sasuke wondered about that for a moment, until it finally hit him. Do you mean the nine-tailed fox? Sasuke asked. Naruto had been leaning against the arm of the couch, but straightened at Sasuke's statement. A shadow crossed his eyes and his previously expressionless face turned cold. You know about that, Naruto stated. Orochimaru knew, was all Sasuke said. Naruto pondered the statement for a moment. So everything the snake knew you now know? Something like that, Sasuke replied. He hadn't told Tsunade about that either, but he didn't think that Naruto would tell her. Naruto regarded him as if waiting for Sasuke to say something about the fox, and Sasuke wasn't sure if he saw hope or dread in Naruto's guarded eyes. Knowing about the fox explained why the villagers hated you so much, Sasuke said. It doesn't change who you are though. Would you have said the same thing if you'd found out before you went to Odo? Sasuke had to think about that for a moment, before deciding that Naruto deserved an honest answer. Probably. I don't think it would have changed how I viewed you though. Fox or no fox, you're still you. Naruto smiled for the first time since Sasuke had woken up. It wasn't one of Naruto's trademark grins, but a small smile that reached his eyes and made them sparkle. We all have our secrets, Naruto said. How many of the people in our class know? Just Sakura, Naruto said. There was no need to tell anyone else. Sasuke nodded his understanding. Secrets were kept for a reason, after all. Sasuke dropped his head back onto his knees, but kept his eyes on Naruto. Naruto was taller, leaner, and had finally stopped wearing the awful orange jumpsuit. He was now dressed all in black, pants, shirt, vest, forehead protector, and arm guards. The necklace around his neck was very noticeable against the black fabric, and Sasuke suddenly realized why that necklace was so important. It had been the first Hokage's necklace, after all. Naruto's hair was a bit longer than it had been, but he kept it away from his face with the forehead protector. Where Naruto's face had once been open and lively, it was now closed and still as stone. Sasuke wondered if, when he looked at himself in the mirror, he'd see the same thing. What did Tsunade say? I don't think she's going to have me executed for treason, Sasuke replied. I don't know what she is going to do though. She said I could live in my family home for the time being. I'd have A and B with me at all times, but other than that, I could come and go as I please. Naruto took it all in. Did she give you a time frame? She said to give her 3 days to meet with the council, the rest of the ANBU, and the Jonin. It's not going to be easy, Sasuke. No, it's not. They have every right to hate me, you know. I left the village on my own. I turned my back on everyone here, including you and Sakura, to go off and gain enough power to kill my brother. You should have left me behind to pay for my mistakes. Most of the villagers would have gladly left you to suffer, Naruto finally said. It's a good thing that Sakura and I aren't like everyone else. It's not going to be easy for you two either, Sasuke said. The Hokage said that she'd suspended you and might reduce your rank. Naruto shrugged. Tsunade says a lot of things, he said. You're right on one thing, though. It's not going to be easy. We were a team once, remember? Sasuke nodded. We always worked together well, though thick and thin. We have to be willing to work together on this one too, or either one of us is going to make it unscathed. Can you do that, Sasuke? Sasuke didn't know what to say. He'd been alone for such a long time that he'd forgotten what it was like to trust, to rely on someone because that someone was relying on you too. He had done it once though. If you can do it, I can do it, Sasuke said, a hint of his old smugness in his voice. Good. We have ourselves a deal, then. There you have it, another chapter. Next up, Kakashi finally returns. Tsunade makes Sasuke's presence known. Naruto and Sakura become Konoha's least favorite ninjas. Chapter 3, Prodigal Sons. It was shortly before midnight when Hitaki Kakashi finally crossed the gate into Konoha. He didn't slow his pace, however, not even when the gate guards yelled irritably that even though they knew who he was, they needed to see his identification. He was tired, dirty, and somewhat bloody and wanted nothing more than to go home to a hot shower and a warm bed. Naruto had given him a preview copy of the 6th volume of Ika Ika Paradise shortly before he'd left for his mission, but since the mission had been a classified S-rank mission, he hadn't taken the book with him. He was looking forward to reading at least the first few chapters before he went to sleep tonight. His route home took him close to the Hokage Tower, and as he passed it, he couldn't help but notice that the light was still on in the Hokage's office. Kakashi slowed his pace until he was standing in the building directly across the tower. While it was not unusual for the Hokage to work late, something told him that this was not a routine late night at the office for Tsunade-sama. Due to the lateness of the hour, he'd planned on giving the Hokage his report in the morning. However, if she was still awake and working, she wouldn't mind getting the report early. Excuse firmly in place, Kakashi jumped the remainder of the way to the tower. He let himself in and wondered why, if the Hokage was working late, the customary ANBU that guarded her were not at their posts. Shrugging, Kakashi shoved the detail into the back of his mind for later. He knocked firmly on the door to the office and was rewarded with a short and angry come in. He stood on the other side of the door, momentarily caught by uncertainty. Maybe he should have gone straight home after all. When he finally pushed open the door, he found the Hokage sitting at her desk, looking at him expectantly. You're late, Tsunade-sama said. Kakashi frowned. I wasn't aware that I had a curfew, Hokage-sama. He wasn't even supposed to be back yet. He'd deliberately not stopped to take any breaks since he'd left Hidden Mist just so he could get home before dawn. The fact that Tsunade-sama didn't seem very surprised to see him made him believe that she'd been waiting for him. I saw you standing across the way, Kakashi. If you hadn't stopped by my office, I would have had to go after you, so thank you for saving me the trouble. The comment caught his attention as he slowly made his way to the Hokage's desk. He hated not knowing what was going on, and the smirk on her face made him positive that she knew something he didn't, something he would most likely dislike. She sat stiffly in her chair, which was a contrast to her flippant attitude, and it made Kakashi wonder if she'd come across any more reports about possible attacks while he'd been gone. Why is that, Hokage-sama? Kakashi asked. Tsunade's eyes closed briefly and she sighed. You need to visit Naruto, was all she said. Naruto? Is he okay? Ever since the invasion by Oto, and the inevitable confrontation with Orochimaru, Naruto had obtained an almost suicidal streak. They'd been vulnerable to attack after almost losing the village once again, and the hidden villages not allied with Konoha had taken advantage of that. On several occasions, Naruto had taken it upon himself to go and intercept the groups of ninja sent to attack Konoha on his own without telling anyone. The last time he'd done it, he'd limped back to Konoha and had to be carried to the hospital by the gate guards, before they'd even known that a group of ninja had been on their way to attack them. The brat is fine, Tsunade-sama said, but Kakashi could tell that he'd guessed right and whatever this was about it involved Naruto, and had the Hokage very angry. Just go visit him, Kakashi. Kakashi nodded. I'll stop by first thing in the morning. No, you need to go right now. Kakashi's frown deepened. With all due respect, Hokage-sama, why do I have to go right now? It's past midnight. He's probably asleep by now. Tsunade-sama chuckled, but Kakashi could see no humor on her face. I doubt he's going to be getting much sleep for a while, so you don't have to worry about waking him. Go to his apartment, Kakashi. Tsunade-sama's words left Kakashi with no desire to do anything but what she asked him to do. He bowed to her, and had almost made it to the door when her voice stopped him. You'll appreciate this tomorrow. Without turning around, Kakashi left the office and headed towards Naruto's apartment at twice the speed he'd used to get home. Kakashi had become close to his former team in the past few years, despite the fact that he was no longer their teacher. A touch of guilt churned in his stomach as it always did when he thought about that fact. His neglect of them in favor of Sasuke had led them to other, better teachers that had molded them into the fine ninja they were today. They trained together once in a while and had undertaken a few missions together, as comrades, which had led to the bond they shared now. Sasuke, of course, was another shared bond between them. Kakashi had a feeling that Sasuke would forever be the link that tied them together, no matter where their lives led them. As he neared Naruto's apartment, he slowed. He was tempted to sneak by a window and take a look inside, but discarded the idea when he realized that Naruto would sense him and wouldn't appreciate him sneaking around. Instead, he made his way up the stairs quickly and knocked on the door. He heard movement inside the apartment, as if furniture was being moved out of the way, before someone came to the door. "That better be you, Kakashi," Naruto's voice came from the other side of the door. "If you're someone else pretending to be Kakashi, I'm going to kick your ass." Kakashi laughed despite the knot in his stomach. If Naruto was joking, he had to be okay. "I'm starving and wanted ramen," Kakashi said. "Ichiraku is closed, so you're the next best thing." Kakashi heard the locks being undone on the door before it was opened. Naruto stood on the other side of the door, still fully dressed in his work clothes. The inside of the apartment was well lit, and Kakashi could see 2 cups of tea on the table in front of the couch. He could also sense another presence in the apartment, but the person was masking his or her chakra well enough that Kakashi couldn't identify it. "Who is with you?" Kakashi asked. "Why don't you come in and find out?" Naruto said and waved him in. Kakashi trusted Naruto, but the look of pleased satisfaction on his face made Kakashi wonder what Naruto was up to. It had been many years since Naruto had stopped pulling pranks with any regularity, but he still did so every once in a while. Kakashi had fallen victim to them a few times and was in no mood to do so right now. "If there is a bucket of water above the door, I swear I'll hunt you down and hang you upside down from the Hokage monument first thing tomorrow morning." Naruto laughed. "There's nothing above the door, Kakashi, come in already." He did so and Naruto closed the door behind him. It wasn't until he was fully into the room that the door to Naruto's bedroom opened and out walked someone that sent Kakashi's alarms blaring and brought up very unpleasant memories. His hand immediately went to the weapons pouch strapped to his thigh, but Naruto's hand on his arm stopped him before he could get a kunai, or 10. Kakashi turned towards the blonde, who shook his head. "I understand your caution, Kakashi, but I assure you that I mean you no harm." A chill went down his spine at the sound of the cold and calculating voice. The last time Kakashi had heard it, he'd been on a one-way trip to hell. "Orochimaru does not reside in my body anymore," Sasuke said. "It's just me." Sasuke held his hands out in front of him where Kakashi could see them. He had stopped far enough away so that he couldn't be touched, but close enough so that Kakashi got a good look at his eyes. He didn't see, or sense, any malice from the young man. If anything, the look in Sasuke's dark eyes was as close to pleading as Kakashi had ever seen. After staring at Sasuke, speechless, for what seemed like an eternity, Kakashi finally broke the silence. "How?" he asked, and almost smacked himself for his stupidity. "Does it matter?" Naruto asked. Kakashi wasn't sure of the answer to that question. He wasn't sure of much of anything at the moment. He couldn't remember the last time he had been this stunned, and he hated himself for it. He was supposed to be prepared for anything, because he'd spent the majority of his life making sure of that. How could he have prepared himself for the return of the student he'd chosen to devote his time to, only to have said student defect and join a more powerful teacher, who then took over the student's body and attacked their village? His fists clenched at his sides and anger flowed freely through his body. Naruto and Sasuke both sensed it, because he could feel their reactions to it. He wanted to say something flippant or perverted to defuse the situation like he normally did, but he couldn't think of anything. All he could do was stare at Sasuke, who simply stared calmly back at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked Naruto. Naruto's face had taken on that deathly calm mask it got when the young man was on a mission that wasn't entirely to his liking, or when he was trying to hide what he was really feeling. "We didn't want to take the risk of you stopping us," the blonde said. "What do you mean?" Kakashi trailed off. He didn't have to ask who he was, because there was only one other person it could possibly be. He wasn't going to argue with Naruto about it, because what was done was done. Sasuke's emotions flared momentarily, long enough for Kakashi to sense the uncertainty that the young man was feeling. By the time Kakashi faced Sasuke once again, his chakra had calmed and his face was devoid of emotion. "How are you handling all of this, Sasuke?" Kakashi asked, noting for the first time that despite the calm exterior, Sasuke was as rattled by the reunion as he was. "I'm fine," Sasuke replied. Kakashi almost smiled at how some things never changed. Sasuke was still as closed off as ever. One of the truly strange things to him when Orochimaru had been in possession of Sasuke's body was how much he talked. Kakashi had never had Sasuke's voice so much as he had that day when they'd fought, and Kakashi doubted that he'd get to hear much of it now. "It's good to know that you're handling everything well," Kakashi replied. "Since the Hokage was the one that sent me, I take it that she is aware of the situation." Naruto nodded. "She's going to make Sasuke's return public tomorrow morning." Kakashi nodded. "Where will you be staying?" he asked Sasuke. "I'll stay with Naruto for the next couple of days, until I can get my house ready to be lived in again." "You're going to live in your house?" Kakashi asked, surprised. He would have thought that Sasuke would have wanted nothing to do with his clan again. That's where the Hokage ordered me to stay, Sasuke said. Since I have little choice at the moment, that is where I will stay. Kakashi supposed that the plan made sense. Sasuke would be close enough to Naruto if something came up, and the Hokage could have the Uchiha neighborhood well watched. The place was also isolated and away from the main part of the village so that if something did happen, the least amount of civilians would be harmed. Kakashi took a deep breath, released it, and stared at his former students. I don't suppose either of you wants to tell me what happened. I'm surprised that Oto didn't send every available ninja out here as soon as they realized that Sasuke was no longer there. Naruto's eyes darkened at the comment, and he immediately looked away from Kakashi. The reinstated ANBU had known the young man long enough to know that Naruto did not look away unless he was feeling guilty about something. What is it, Naruto? What happened in Oto? Naruto shook his head, but didn't reply. He doesn't remember, Kakashi, Sasuke replied instead. I don't remember either, but everyone in Oto is dead. Kakashi's eyebrows rose in surprise for the second time that night. That was something he was most definitely not expecting. It was no wonder Tsunade didn't have but the 3 ANBU stationed outside. She wasn't expecting anyone to come after Sasuke. Everyone? Kakashi asked, unconsciously echoing Sasuke's question to Naruto earlier in the day. Yes, everyone, Naruto replied. The three stood in uncomfortable silence for what seemed like an eternity. Naruto looked everywhere but at Kakashi and Sasuke, while Sasuke kept his eyes on Naruto. It seemed to Kakashi that at that moment, both had forgotten that he was even in the room. Finally, Kakashi cleared his throat. Whatever they knew that they weren't telling him would come to his attention sooner or later. Forcing the issue now would accomplish nothing. Well, it's late, and I have an appointment with my new book, he said and made his way out of the apartment. When he was at the door, he turned towards Sasuke one last time. Welcome home. Without waiting for a reply, he disappeared. You are a fool, Kakashi. You're just like your father. Kakashi held his hand against his shoulder trying, without much success, to stop the bleeding that the Chidori had caused when it had ripped through it. His left arm was useless, and he could no longer form any seals, which is what the bastard that had used his own move against him had wanted to accomplish. His Sharingan flared in anger, and it was matched by the pair of similar, red eyes staring at him from the other side of the small clearing. He did everyone a favor by taking his own life, the person continued in a voice so familiar, and yet so foreign and disgusting. A disgraced ninja deserves nothing less. He was tempted to respond to the taunt, but Kakashi knew that if he did, he'd be playing right into the snake's hand. Instead, he glared at a face that had become so familiar to him in the past few years, a face that he decided was worth all he had to offer, everything he could pass on. The boy in front of him had been the first, and only, student he'd fully taken in, and he'd been rewarded for his trouble by having his Chidori almost deal him a killing blow. If he hadn't moved at the last second, it would have crushed his heart. You talk too much, Kakashi finally said as he desperately racked his brain for something, anything, he could do to get out of this mess. The boy in front of him smirked. What's the matter, Kakashi-sensei? You don't look so well. Sasuke's calm voice rang through the clearing and for a split second, Kakashi dared hope that maybe his student was still somewhere in there, that Orochimaru hadn't taken everything. The boy liked you, Kakashi? Well, as much as he could like anyone. He's truly upset right now, seeing you beaten, bloody, and almost defeated. The comment struck a chord in Kakashi. Sasuke was still alive in there somewhere. Both Naruto and Sakura believed that he was, even though there was nothing to indicate that. Now he had some tangible proof to give them, if he survived long enough to talk to them again. The ground beneath him rumbled and before he could move out of the way, he was caught in the jaws of a massive snake. He screamed in agony as the jaws pierced his body, shattering bone as they entered. He immediately lost all feeling in his legs and could only weakly claw at the upper jaw with his one good hand. He managed to grab a kunai and embed it into the jaw, but the snake would not let go. How does it feel, Kakashi-sensei? Orochimaru, using Sasuke's voice, whispered in his ear. You are weak. You were always weak and now you'll die just as your father did, a coward. Manda's jaws opened and Kakashi was left to fall to the ground below. He hit left shoulder first, and what little feeling still remained in his body was suddenly gone. This is it, it's over, Kakashi said to himself as he felt his life draining away. I couldn't save him, I couldn't even save myself. Kakashi jerked to a sitting position on his bed, his hands instinctively going to his lower back and chest, where Manda had done most of the damage. He ran his left hand over his chest, not needing the light to tell him where the scars were. His hand then traveled up to his shoulder, where the Chidori had destroyed the joint. He was breathing hard and sweat rolled off his forehead and down his face. His body trembled slightly, and it took him a while to regain control of his wayward emotions. He'd had the flashback quite often after the confrontation with Orochimaru, but he hadn't had it in over a year. It didn't surprise him that he had it now, however. He didn't remember much of what happened after Manda had let him go, but he'd heard from others that Naruto and Sakura had gotten there and fought Orochimaru as well. Kakashi closed his eyes and an image of Sakura's haunted face immediately jumped into his mind. She'd been at the hospital every day to visit him and Naruto, and Kakashi had no trouble telling just how much that confrontation had taken out of her, and out of Naruto. The three had never been the same again. Now, Orochimaru was dead and Sasuke was back. What the hell were they supposed to do now? A knock on the door made Kakashi jump and he cursed himself for his lack of attention. He relaxed slightly when he recognized the man standing on the other side of the door. What do you want, Asuma? It's not even dawn yet, Sarutobi Asuma chuckled. On the contrary, Kakashi, it's almost 9. Huh! Kakashi said to himself and looked around his well-lit apartment. The sun was, indeed, out, and he hadn't noticed. I just got back from a mission, Kakashi said. I'm taking the day off. As if to prove his point, even though Asuma couldn't see him, Kakashi lay back down on the bed and pulled the covers over his unmasked face. The Hokage has called a general assembly of all ninja with Chunin status or higher. She sent me specifically to get you so that you wouldn't show up hours late. Kakashi suddenly realized what assembly Asuma was talking about. Naruto had said that Tsunade-sama would announce Sasuke's return today, hadn't he? Kakashi, you have 20 minutes to get to the tower, Asuma said. Groaning, Kakashi got out of bed. He padded barefoot and dressed only in a pair of black shorts towards the door and opened it slightly, so all Asuma would be able to see was his right eye. I'll be there, Kakashi said. The Hokage told me to make sure you got there on time and I'm going to make sure that you get there, even if you won't let me in, Asuma said, his arms crossed in front of him and a cigarette dangling from his mouth. Fine, but you're staying out there, Kakashi said. He slammed the door behind him and headed for the bathroom to take a quick shower. The assembly was going to be interesting, that was for sure. I'm sorry kids, but there is no class today. Some kids groaned in disappointment, while others pumped their fists in excitement. Why, Iruka-sensei? One of his students asked. The Hokage has called a meeting and I have to be there, Kumiko, he replied. We'll have class tomorrow, I promise. The little girl smiled at him, before leaving the classroom with a group of her friends. Everyone else followed and Iruka waited until the last child had left before he made his way out of the academy and towards the tower. What could the Hokage want to tell them now? The last time he'd been called to one of these meetings had been shortly before they'd been attacked by Oto. Iruka shuddered at the thought. The experience had left him with many scars, both physical and emotional, and he wasn't looking forward to attaining any more so soon. He was halfway to the tower when he noticed a familiar face a little ways in front of him. Iruka decided to be sneaky and play a little trick on the village's renowned former prankster. He masked his chakra, formed several seals and within seconds appeared in front of the blonde. Geez, Iruka-sensei, don't do that! The blonde yelled as he sidestepped his former teacher. Iruka grinned as he watched the young man's face. You must be preoccupied this morning, Naruto, Iruka said. I am usually not able to sneak up on you anymore. Iruka got into step beside Naruto as they continued on their way. Naruto shrugged at the comment and gave his former teacher a grin, but Iruka had known the blonde way too long to be fooled by it. You know what this meeting is about, don't you? Iruka asked. Naruto's shoulders tensed even more and the young man refused to look at Iruka. He did drop the grin, however, and his face displayed a blankness that sent shivers down Iruka's spine. You'll find out soon enough, was all the young man said. The rest of the way to the tower was spent in silence. Iruka had learned not to push Naruto when he got into a mood like the one he was currently in. It would get him nowhere and it would push the blonde away. Naruto would talk to him when he was ready. All Iruka had to do was be patient and wait for him. When they got to the tower, they immediately made their way to the meeting hall. Iruka was not surprised to see that the room was already half full. He was headed for the front when he noticed that Naruto was no longer with him. Instead, the young man was leaning against the back wall, away from most of the other ninja in the room. Frowning, Iruka made his way back to Naruto. You're usually the first one to the front, Iruka commented. What's different about today? Let's just say I'm ready for a quick getaway, Naruto said, his lips slightly turned in a small smile. You don't have to stay here with me, Iruka-sensei. Iruka gave Naruto a smile and leaned against the wall beside the younger man. I have a feeling things will be a lot more interesting back here. Sakura joined them a few minutes later. She greeted Iruka with a small, nervous smile, before making herself comfortable against the wall on the other side of Naruto. Sakura's presence alone was not enough to really raise Iruka's suspicions, because she and Naruto spent a lot of time together. Hatake Kakashi's appearance, however, told Iruka that the three of them were well involved in what the Hokage had called them to discuss. You're on time, both Naruto and Sakura said at the same time as soon as they saw Asuma dragging Kakashi through the door. Kakashi had the decency to look embarrassed. I had no choice. He broke into my room, dragged me half naked out of bed and made me get dressed, he said pointing at Asuma. Asuma shook his head and gave a long suffering sigh. The things I have to put up with, he said. I'll leave the old man to you too, he added and made his way towards the front, ignoring Kakashi's indignant cry of I'm not old yet. Good morning, Iruka, Kakashi said with a smile. I haven't seen you in a while. Good morning, Iruka replied. You've been out on missions quite often lately. It's a living, he said and settled against the wall on the other side of Iruka. You don't have to stay with us, Kakashi, Sakura said. Kakashi shrugged. There is safety in numbers, children, he simply said. Iruka's eyebrow rose at the comment, and he gave each of his companions a long look. Kakashi, despite his cheerfulness and relaxed posture, was tense. Sakura was absently playing with the hem of her shirt with one hand, while the other was clenched into a fist at her side. Naruto's eyes moved quickly from person to person, as if looking for someone, or something. He too, was outwardly relaxed, but the set of his jaw said otherwise. Everyone, can I have your attention please? Iruka's thoughts were put on hold as he turned his attention to the Hokage. Thank you for coming on such short notice, but I have something very important to share with the rest of you, and with the villagers. The crowd of ninja immediately took their seats and gave their full attention to their leader. Orochimaru is dead, the Hokage stated. Oto has been defeated. Iruka's jaw dropped open in shock. This was not what he had expected to hear, and all around the room, he could see similar reactions. The quiet in the room was oppressive, until everyone began speaking at once. Excited, surprised, and worried voices all warred with each other for supremacy, until Iruka thought his eardrums would burst from the onslaught. He turned to Naruto, and it suddenly dawned on him that Naruto, Sakura, and Kakashi were not surprised at the news. You had something to do with this, didn't you? Iruka asked Naruto without thinking, still in shock over what he'd heard. When Naruto turned to him, his blue eyes were so full of pain that Iruka felt as if a knife had been buried in his chest. Naruto opened his mouth, but no words came out. He shook his head and his eyes became blank, his face steely and unreadable. We can talk later, Iruka, Naruto said and turned away. Silence. The Hokage's voice demanded attention and everyone immediately became silent. The circumstances behind what happened are not important, she said. What is important is that we now have a chance to rebuild our village without worrying about Orochimaru ever again. A thought quickly crossed Iruka's mind and he turned towards his three companions once again. If Orochimaru was dead, then that had to mean that Sasuke was dead as well. However, Naruto didn't seem upset. Well, he was upset, but he wasn't grieving. There's one more thing, the Hokage said. We have a new addition to the village. She motioned for someone who'd been standing behind her in the shadows of the small stage to step closer, and Iruka gasped as he realized who it was. He immediately tensed and wished he'd brought his weapons along. He saw similar reactions throughout the room, as well as a few cries of traitor and murderer. Enough. You are ninja, behave as such, the Hokage reprimanded. Orochimaru is dead, as I said earlier. Uchiha Sasuke is not, and was not ever, Orochimaru, regardless of what you might think. Kakashi's chakra fluctuated beside him and Iruka turned to the silver-haired man only to find him with his nose buried in his book. Iruka then returned his attention to Sasuke, who stood rigid beside the Hokage. He was wearing a white shirt that seemed to envelop him and black pants that were too long and too wide for him. He wore his hair pulled back, which exposed his entire face. Said face was expressionless and his eyes stared straight ahead. How do we know for sure that the snake isn't just hiding inside the Uchiha, waiting for us to drop our guard so he can finish us off? Someone asked. Do you doubt my ability as Hokage to protect this village? The Hokage countered. The person did not speak again. Uchiha Sasuke is guilty of his own crimes, the Hokage continued. He willingly betrayed the village by leaving and joining forces with Orochimaru. He divulged information to the enemy and cooperated in plotting against our village during that time. For those crimes, he will be punished. However, he is not to be held accountable for the attack on our village. Orochimaru, and Orochimaru alone, is responsible for that. Orochimaru is no longer around to take responsibility for what he did, someone else said. Uchiha is here, however. Are you insane? Naruto suddenly yelled, causing everyone to turn around and pierce him with unfriendly glares. The snake is dead, what more do you want? The man, a ninja that Iruka was not very familiar with, stood up and faced Naruto. Are you the one responsible for bringing him back, you monster? The man asked. We already had enough trouble in the village with you, but now you had to go off and bring another monster. What gives you the right to put our village in more danger than it already is? Iruka grabbed Naruto's arm as he stepped forward, holding him in place. You really are an idiot, aren't you, Toma? Iruka said, finally putting a name to the face. We should focus on the positive here, Toma smirked. You're the idiot, Yumino, if you take up for that monster. Enough. Shut up before I have you thrown out, the Hokage said, glaring at all three of them. When it became clear that no one else was going to speak, she continued to talk. Iruka released Naruto's arm and the young man slumped against the wall once again. This is my ruling, and I have the council's full approval. Uchiha Sasuke will be allowed to live in the village. He will be under constant supervision until I deem him worthy enough to be allowed on his own. He will not be allowed to be a ninja until I deem it appropriate. But believe me, I'm not going to waste a valuable resource like him. The murmurs from the crowd were quieter this time, but Iruka could tell that the majority of the assembled ninja were not happy with the ruling. A few turned and gave Naruto and Sakura dirty glares, which they were only too happy to return. Iruka got a few of his own, but he was not afraid of standing by his principles. Whatever issues he had with Sasuke he'd work out for Naruto's sake, because he knew how much Sasuke meant to Naruto. Iruka had never been afraid to be on Naruto's side, and he was not about to start now. You're free to go, providing that you follow our agreement, the Hokage told Sasuke, who gave her a short nod. Sasuke stepped off the small stage and made his way through the crowd, who immediately stepped away from him as he passed. They followed him with their eyes, a few murmuring unpleasant things under their breath. When he reached Iruka and his companions, Naruto and Sakura immediately stood on either side of him, daring anyone to do anything. Iruka had to smile at his former student's determination. Let it never be said that Naruto wasn't loyal. He wondered how the villagers, and most of the ninja, could still be so blind to the fact. Iruka-sensei, Sasuke said when he reached them. Sasuke, Iruka replied uneasily. If I hear about anyone, and I mean anyone, harassing Sasuke, Naruto, or Sakura over any of this, I will deal with it personally. Do I make myself clear? Everyone returned their attention to the Hokage. I asked you a question. Do I make myself clear? There was a chorus of yes, Hokage, and she nodded her approval. Very well, this meeting is over. Everyone began filing out, almost everyone giving the 3 former teammates glares before they left. The few that didn't either ignored them completely, or came by to say that they were glad to see Sasuke back. It's good to see you, Sasuke, Hyuga Hinata said as she made her way out of the crowd. She didn't shy away or avert her eyes as she had when she was younger. Instead, the medical ninja gave the young man a brilliant smile. It's been a long time. Sasuke gave her a small nod in acknowledgement, and she quickly left. An ANBU in full cloak and mask suddenly appeared beside Naruto. Some people don't know when to leave well enough alone, the man said, his voice muffled by the mask he wore. Some of us still remember what loyalty to a teammate is, Naruto replied. The ANBU was quiet for a moment, before he tipped his head slightly. That stubbornness was bound to pay off sooner or later, I suppose, the ANBU said. I'm glad you're on our side. With that, the man disappeared. Who was that? Sasuke asked. Naruto smirked. That was Neji. He's gotten dramatic over the years, especially after he became ANBU. Well, another ANBU remarked as he appeared beside Sasuke. I should have worked harder in my attempts to dissuade Naruto from keeping that promise. But if it got rid of the snake, I guess we can put up with you. You're back, Shikamaru, Naruto said, smiling for the first time that morning. I didn't think you'd be here. Are you kidding, and miss all the fun? Shikamaru replied as he took off his mask. So this is why you two looked so serious yesterday, Ino remarked as she pushed her way through the still departing ninja. I should have known it had something to do with Sasuke. Sakura shrugged and rubbed the back of her head. You're too nosy for your own good, Ino. Suddenly serious, Ino turned to face Sasuke. It really is good to see you again, Sasuke. It is good to be back, Sasuke replied. Well, children, now that the reunion is concluded, I'm going to catch up on some much-needed sleep, Kakashi said and disappeared. Iruka grabbed Naruto's arm and maneuvered him towards the now empty middle of the room. We have a lot to talk about, young man, Iruka said, slipping into his elder brother role as easily as he stepped into his teacher's role. You're not going to get away with not telling me about how all of this came about. I know, Iruka-sensei, but just not now, Naruto replied. There are some things I need to work through first. That's understandable, Iruka replied. Whatever you need, I'm there for you, and you know that, right? Naruto gave him a sincere smile that lit up his eyes. I know, Iruka-sensei. Now go off and spend time with your friends. I'll talk to you later, Naruto. As Iruka made his way out the door, he heard Naruto inviting everyone to lunch. The whispers were loud and the glares were piercing. Sasuke didn't mind when they were directed at him, because he more than deserved them. He did mind, however, when the villagers and other ninja that they ran into insulted Sakura and Naruto along with him. Naruto was handling the reaction well. Sasuke shouldn't have been surprised since the blonde had grown up with this sort of treatment from the villagers. He hadn't deserved the harsh words then, and he didn't deserve them now. He turned his head slightly to look at Sakura, whose face was completely devoid of emotion. The look didn't suit her, and he felt guilty for being the reason for her withdrawal. This is ridiculous, Shikamaru said. You would think everyone would be rejoicing at the fact that Orochimaru is dead. Ino voiced her agreement, and that was the end of the conversation. After Naruto had proposed that they all go out for lunch, Sasuke had been tempted to decline the invitation and head to his house instead, to get it ready to be lived in again. He had no desire to roam around the village, and he hadn't wanted to expose his former teammates to more of the scorn he'd seen in the meeting. If the ninja had reacted that strongly to Sasuke's presence, the villagers' reactions were bound to be even stronger. He had not been disappointed. Ino and Shikamaru had received their own glares, and it puzzled Sasuke that they wanted to associate themselves with him at all. Why would they put themselves in a position to be mistreated when they didn't have to? They were currently headed for Naruto's favorite eating place, Ichiraku, after having been refused service at the first 3 restaurants they'd gone to. Naruto and Sakura had both protested loudly, but they'd been asked to leave anyway. In the end, Naruto had said that he had faith in the old man that had been serving him ramen since he was a kid and would give him one chance to prove it. I don't think this is a good idea, Sasuke finally said as they rounded the corner onto the street where the ramen stand had stood for as long as Sasuke could remember. What's not a good idea, lunch? Naruto asked. He gave Sasuke a grin. I'm starving. You know what I mean, Naruto, Sasuke insisted. Naruto is right, Sakura added. We're not going to go hide just because you're back home, Sasuke, she said. I wouldn't have thought that the villagers' glares would affect you all that much, Uchiha, Shikamaru added. They don't, Sasuke replied and managed to keep the iciness down to a minimum. If they want to blame me for everything, then fine. So what's the problem then? Ino wanted to know. When Sasuke didn't immediately reply, Sakura took it upon herself to provide an answer. Don't worry about us, Sasuke. We can take care of ourselves. Before Sasuke could reply, Naruto clapped his hands. We're here. Now we can get some decent food. The small group walked inside the stand, and the owner, Tucci, greeted them. The automatic greeting died in his throat, however, as his eyes fell on Sasuke. Sasuke schooled his features into a blank slate, while hoping that, for Naruto's sake more than for his own, this man would not turn them away. Tucci's gaze left Sasuke to land on Naruto, who had inched closer to his friend. Naruto was tense and Sasuke could already see the argument forming in the blonde's head. Welcome, the old man finally said, a small, but sincere smile on his face. What can I get for you today? Naruto expelled the breath he'd been holding and gave the old man a wide grin. I'll have a bowl of miso ramen, he exclaimed as he plopped down on the closest stool. Each person gave the man their order, until only Sasuke was left. What can I get for you, young man? The man asked. I'm not hungry, Sasuke said. I'll just wait for them to finish. Nonsense, the old man said. No one comes in here without eating a bowl of ramen. He turned around and proceeded to make the food that had been ordered. Sasuke finally took the seat closest to him, which put him on the end beside Naruto. The smell wafting from where the old man was cooking was delicious, but at the same time, it turned Sasuke's stomach and sent his mind wandering to a time he would rather forget. His right knee screamed with every step that he took, but Sasuke refused to let the pain show on his face. Blood was flowing from various wounds to his face, chest, arms, and legs, enough to leave bloody footprints on the polished, wooden floor as he walked. He walked stiffly, but held his head up high, refusing to show weakness. He didn't have to worry, since most of the people he had run into on the way back to his room avoided looking at him, and stayed out of his way. He didn't have to be particularly observant to feel the fear that radiated from them as they scurried away like mice. Orochimaru had made sure that everyone in the village knew who Sasuke belonged to, and what his purpose was for being there. Everyone avoided any contact with Sasuke until they were sent on missions. At that time, Sasuke was their leader in Orochimaru's stead, and they feared him as much as they feared Orochimaru. Kabuto was perhaps the only exception. The ninja was respectful, even if Sasuke could tell that he didn't mean a word he said, and was the only one Orochimaru allowed near Sasuke when Sasuke was injured. The medic nin's expertise in the healing arts came in handy often, and Orochimaru trusted no one else with his soon-to-be vessel. Kabuto knew his importance, and used it to his advantage whenever possible. Sasuke turned down the hallway that would lead to his room and only then allowed the pain to show on his face. No one else dared enter this part of the compound, and Sasuke was sure that neither Kabuto nor Orochimaru would be waiting for him when he arrived in his room. If Orochimaru had wanted Kabuto to heal him, he would have done so already. This time, Orochimaru wanted Sasuke to suffer the lesson he'd just been taught so that he never doubted his place again. As soon as he entered, Sasuke noticed the strange smell coming from the middle of the room. It was familiar, but he couldn't immediately place it. The smell made his stomach rumble, and he realized that he'd not had anything to eat all day. He limped in the direction of the smell and came to a complete halt when he saw what had been left on his dresser, a seeming bowl of miso ramen. I want miso ramen! The utterance was so unexpected that it made Sasuke jump. He didn't bother looking around his room, because he knew that the blonde loudmouth that had uttered those words now only existed in his head. His throat constricted at the thought that he would never see that blonde loudmouth ever again. When he reached the dresser, he bent slightly to get a closer smell of the food. He realized too late that he wasn't alone in his room and he'd fallen for the distraction the ramen had provided. Never let down your guard, Sasuke. By the time Sasuke reacted, a blade had lodged itself in his lower back. A gasp escaped his lips at the searing pain, and he managed to turn his head enough to see Kabuto's smirking face behind him. His left arm reached out for his own sword, which hung from his belt, but Kabuto twisted the blade inside Sasuke's body, which caused Sasuke to groan and almost collapse. The medical ninja chose that moment to savagely pull the blade out, which sent Sasuke into the dresser face first. The bowl of ramen turned over, and the scalding broth burned his face and neck. Sasuke jerked away when he felt someone touch his back, and one of his hands hit the steaming bowl of miso ramen that had been put in front of him. Some of the broth spilled over onto his hand and Sasuke hissed as the liquid burned him. The smell made his stomach churn and he had to fight the bile rising to his throat. It was a losing battle, however, so he shoved Naruto, who had been the one to touch him, out of the way and ran out of the stand. He ducked into the closest alley and threw up behind a trash can. He hadn't eaten anything all day, so there wasn't much in his stomach to throw up. His lower back throbbed in remembered pain, and he forced his brain to shove the memory and the pain into a corner of his mind. He heard footsteps behind him and tensed, until he recognized Naruto. The blonde walked slowly towards him, making sure to alert Sasuke of his proximity by shuffling his feet as he walked. When Naruto had reached Sasuke, he held out a glass of water. Sasuke took it and rinsed his mouth, before taking a small sip. Are you okay? Naruto asked. I'm fine, Sasuke replied. I'm sorry. You've been staring at the bowl for a while and you didn't react when I called your name. Sasuke shrugged. It's fine, Naruto. Naruto clearly wasn't convinced, and Sasuke could see the warring emotions in the blonde's expressive eyes. If I'd known you disliked ramen this much, I would have offered to cook something at my place instead, Naruto finally said. The concerned look in Naruto's eyes touched something in Sasuke, because it had been a long time since he'd seen anyone be concerned for him. He took a deep breath and forced himself to give his friend an explanation. The blonde deserved that much. I don't dislike it, Sasuke finally said in a voice that was barely audible, even to him. Kabuto used it to distract me once and I ended up with his blade buried in my back. Sasuke refused to take his eyes off Naruto's. He was waiting for the pity that was sure would come and was surprised when instead of pity all he saw was a deeper concern, followed by anger. That bastard, Naruto said. At least he's dead now. Sasuke nodded in agreement. Yes, at least he's dead. The two young men remained quiet for a moment, until Naruto broke the silence. Come on, your ramen is getting cold, Naruto said and led Sasuke back to the stand. Sasuke found everyone's eyes on him as they re-entered the stand. He gave them a curt nod before retaking his seat. Is everything okay? The Tsuchi asked. Everything is fine. Sasuke just ate something that didn't agree with him for breakfast, Naruto said. The conversation slowly started once again as Sasuke picked up his chopsticks. He wasn't hungry and didn't want to eat the ramen, but it would be idiotic of him to let that one incident affect him this much. He took a small piece of meat and put it in his mouth, then forced himself to chew it and swallow it. He got halfway through the serving before he couldn't eat anymore. He put the chopsticks down and took another sip of the water. Maybe there was hope for him, after all. Maybe he could make it back from the abyss he'd been in for the last 6 years with most of his sanity intact. He had to, because if he couldn't, death would be his only other option. Chapter 4, Dark Recesses of the Heart. You are a foolish little boy. The face that stared at him held a smirk. That alone was not unusual, because Naruto had seen plenty of smirks on that face. The hatred that accompanied the smirk, however, he was not used to. Nothing, not even Itachi, had ever made Sasuke's face as twisted and evil as Orochimaru was making it now. You shouldn't have come, Orochimaru said as he licked the blade of the sword he'd just run through Naruto's stomach. Your friend is dead, and even if he weren't, he wouldn't want to go back to Konoha. Naruto's anger, which he'd barely managed to rein in since he'd entered the compound, spiked and brought forth a surge of the fox's chakra. The razor-thin line that separated his consciousness from that of the demon momentarily blurred, and for a split second, Naruto existed as a being of pure rage. Power surged through his body, and he rejoiced in knowing that nothing, not even this pesky human in front of him, could stand in his way. As soon as he was able to think again, Naruto pushed the bloodlust back into the dark part of his mind where it belonged. The only time he'd lost control of the demon's power had almost cost Jiraiya his life, and he'd sworn then that he would never lose to the demon's darker urges ever again. He wasn't sure, however, if he would be able to control the demon a second time, so he had to end this confrontation quickly, before Orochimaru used Naruto's momentary lapse to his advantage. You are a liar, Naruto said, his voice rough, almost a growl. You told Kakashi that Sasuke was still in there somewhere. Orochimaru laughed and ran his hands through Sasuke's too long hair. The Sharingan eyes bore into Naruto, causing him to shiver in both anticipation and fear. Kakashi didn't die? Orochimaru asked as he circled around Naruto. What a pity. Naruto turned with him, keeping Orochimaru in his sights. Naruto was fast, much faster than anyone else in Konoha, but Orochimaru was a hair faster. Sasuke's Sharingan gave him a clear advantage, which had been used against Naruto too many times already. Konoha is still in one piece, you bastard, Naruto said. You didn't destroy it either. Orochimaru stopped circling and crossed his arms, uncaring of the fact that the left arm was gushing blood from where Naruto had almost sliced it off with a Rasengan. Why do you love that place so much? Orochimaru asked. Sasuke's memories tell me that you want to be Hokage, because you want to protect those mindless bastards. Why? Why would you protect those that hate you? Naruto's heart was momentarily filled with the sadness that still plagued him when the villagers' treatment of him was brought up. The sadness was overshadowed by the disgust he felt at hearing Orochimaru mention his dream. However, he felt betrayed, even though he knew Sasuke had probably not willingly told Orochimaru about him, or his dream. The Hokages are all idealistic fools, Orochimaru said when Naruto didn't speak. For someone who thinks that being Hokage is a waste, you sure reacted strongly when Sandaime Hokage didn't choose you as his successor, Naruto finally said. Then again, Yondaime Hokage was a much more honorable man that you could ever hope to be. Orochimaru laughed. Yondaime Hokage is the perfect example, he said. The idiot died sealing that demon inside you. What did he get out of it but an early grave? The villagers didn't even follow his last request, and they claimed to revere him. What last request? Naruto asked despite himself. He knew nothing of the Yondaime Hokage and he couldn't help but be curious. Orochimaru bared his teeth. He wanted you to be seen as a hero, Naruto-kun, he replied, his voice sickly sweet. Yondaime wanted the villagers to respect his sacrifice and his legacy. The words hit Naruto like a slap in the face. Yondaime had wanted Naruto to be seen as a hero. Why hadn't they? Orochimaru suddenly disappeared, and it took Naruto a half-second too long to realize where the snake had gone. When Orochimaru reappeared, Naruto had been pushed against the nearest wall, and had a two-handed Chidori buried in his chest. Naruto gasped, and choked on the blood that rushed up his throat. He spit it out, and it landed on Sasuke's face, coating it red to match his eyes. Naruto was numb. He felt the effects of the Chidori, and had no doubt that it was still active. Sasuke's familiar face was inches from his own, and even though the eyes were the same and the face was the same, the persona behind them was much more sinister. Suddenly, the eyes blinked. The Sharingan deactivated, leaving Naruto staring at confused, onyx eyes. Naruto? The voice was Sasuke's, not Orochimaru's. The face had softened a bit, even though anger still shone through. Naruto wasn't going to be fooled, however. Kakashi had told him that Orochimaru had spoken to him with Sasuke's voice to throw him off guard, and he couldn't afford to lose any more ground. I'm not going to fall for it, you bastard, Naruto choked out as he forced the demon's chakra to travel to his arms and give them the mobility he desperately needed. Orochimaru was finally close enough to touch. If Naruto was going to perform the releasing seal, he had to do it now, before Orochimaru moved away. What's happening? Orochimaru, using Sasuke's voice, asked. Naruto stared at the face of his best friend and for a moment wondered if the confusion and concern in those black eyes was real. Orochimaru's eyes traveled to his hands, which were still buried in Naruto's chest. His eyes widened and the Chidori deactivated. Orochimaru started to pull his arms out, but Naruto forced himself to grab onto Orochimaru's shirt, and then performed the seals that Sakura had spent the last year drilling into him. He channeled a good portion of the chakra he had left into those seals and when he was finished, placed his hands on the closet's surface, Orochimaru's chest. Release! Orochimaru's black eyes widened and he screamed, first in Sasuke's voice and then in his own voice. The hands buried in Naruto's chest were roughly pulled out as Orochimaru began to spasm, and Naruto dropped to his knees, choking on his own blood. His vision became blurry and he had to force himself to stay on his knees. Naruto coughed blood into his hand and rubbed it against the other hand so that both palms were equally soaked in blood. He looked at Orochimaru, who had fallen to the floor beside Naruto. His eyes were closed, but his body continued to spasm. Suddenly, the body became still and black energy lifted off of Sasuke's body. It looked as if Sasuke had shed a very dark, very malignant skin. The energy hissed and transformed into the shape of a snake. It moved towards Naruto, who used the last of his strength to form a second set of seals, more complicated than the first. He was fueling the technique with his own blood and the demon's chakra. As the energy hit him, Naruto lifted his hands and formed the last seal, the tiger. Disperse! There was an ear-splitting shriek, before the energy dispersed like confetti. The pieces burned brightly as they floated up to the ceiling, before disappearing entirely. Naruto dropped to all fours, breathing heavily from the chakra drain and blood loss. Hurry up and heal me, you stupid fox, he muttered to the demon that was already healing the most severe damage. It was going to take a while though, and he wasn't going to be able to replace the blood he'd lost very quickly. Once his vision wasn't so blurry, he slowly made his way towards Sasuke. The young man looked so still, so dead. Tentatively, Naruto reached out with a bloody hand to touch the place where his hands had burned through the shirt, and Naruto could see the seal that he'd placed on Sasuke's skin. He was relieved to see Sasuke's chest slowly rising and falling as he breathed. Hang in there, Sasuke, I'll take you home. The banging of his front door against the wall startled Naruto out of his nightmare, and he jerked upright on the couch he'd fallen asleep on. His chakra flared at the perceived danger, and in the blink of an eye was on his feet and on top of the intruder. He'd shoved the man against the wall and brought the tip of a shuriken to his neck before Naruto realized who he was staring at. What are you doing, Iruka? Naruto yelled, all formality for his former teacher forgotten in his surprise. He stepped away from the elder man and put the shuriken away. I'm sorry, but I felt your chakra spike and heard you yell, Iruka explained as he holstered the 3 kunai he was holding. My only concern was to make sure you were okay. Naruto had to smile at his friend's concern. It was no surprise to Naruto that Iruka cared that much about him, but it still felt good every time he experienced Iruka's protectiveness. I was asleep, Naruto said. I think I was having a nightmare. Naruto closed his door and motioned for Iruka to take a seat on the couch. He then went to the kitchen and put some water on the stove to boil for tea. Do you want to talk about the nightmare? Iruka asked. Naruto sighed. The only bad part about Iruka's concern was that he would not be content with Naruto's assurance that everything was fine. The nightmare, more of a memory, really, still clung to Naruto like a second skin and he needed a minute to pull himself out of it. He felt phantom pains where the Chidori had pierced skin, bones, and organs, and had to resist the urge to rub at his chest. In the end, the foolish plan he'd undertaken had worked out, but it all could have gone so horribly wrong. You can't tell me that everything is okay, Naruto, Iruka said when Naruto didn't reply. You were terrified. As soon as I got close enough to feel your chakra, I felt your terror. Naruto shivered slightly as a piece of the memory surfaced, and he forcibly shoved it to the back of his mind. As much as he respected and cared for Iruka, Naruto didn't think that he could put that memory into words. He had been terrified. Never before had he felt such overwhelming terror and helplessness, and it was through sheer force of will and luck that he was still standing. It was a terror, however, that he would keep to himself. No one else needed to bear the burden with him, and he was glad that Sasuke didn't remember the confrontation. Naruto, Iruka began again, but was interrupted when the teapot whistled. Naruto took the distraction gratefully. He left his friend for a moment to go make tea, and used the time to fully prepare himself for what was to come. A talk with Iruka was unavoidable at this point, but Naruto had to make sure that all of his emotions were well hidden away before he even opened his mouth. He muted his chakra to a level that he could maintain constant, to prevent Iruka from reading it to determine his state of mind. After all, he didn't want to give Iruka more reason to worry. When the tea was finished, Naruto took it back to the living room. He handed Iruka a cup and then sat beside Iruka, his legs crossed under him. The heat of the tea bled into his hands and Naruto took what comfort he could from it. What happened when you went to Oto? How did you manage to bring Sasuke back? Iruka asked. Naruto almost sighed in relief at the change in topic, but wisely refrained from doing so. He took a small sip of tea and winced as the liquid burned down his throat, momentarily reminding him of what it had been like to feel his blood rushing to his mouth. Most of it is a blur, Naruto finally said. I remember thinking on the way there that this was the one chance I had, that if I failed this time, I was going to lose my life and more than likely push Orochimaru towards attacking Konoha once again. He paused for a moment, and regarded his former teacher. If there was anyone in his life that he could truly be honest with, Iruka was that man. Their relationship had become rather distant when Naruto decided to devote his time to training, but Iruka had never held that against him. The elder ninja had always been available with a friendly ear when Naruto had stopped by, which had meant a great deal to the young man. Naruto would honor the man's loyalty now by trusting him with a small piece of the ordeal. When I got there, I lost it, Iruka-sensei, Naruto finally continued. I couldn't tell you how many ninjas I encountered or who they were. I don't even remember how I knew where to go once I got inside the compound. All I remember feeling is a need to get to where Sasuke was. Naruto paused to gather his spinning thoughts into some semblance of order. Iruka watched him carefully, his face guarded. I felt like I was being pulled, Naruto finally continued. The fox was very close to the surface, urging me to kill or be killed. Iruka's eyes widened at the admission, but the man remained quiet. I could tell that even that felt wrong, Naruto added. How was it wrong? Iruka asked. Naruto shook his head, momentarily unable to put into words what he'd felt at the time. He wrung his hands together nervously, even now feeling the prickle of energy that had washed over him as soon as he'd entered Orochimaru's compound. The demon has always been violent, Naruto admitted, but after all of these years, we've come to an understanding. There was something pulling at the demon as well, making him more violent than usual. Do you think it was something Orochimaru was doing? Iruka asked. It could have been. He wasn't surprised when I finally found him, so he had to have known I was close from the moment I breached his defenses. Iruka remained quiet, lost in his own thoughts, for a long moment. Naruto looked down at his hands, suddenly unable to meet his friend's eyes. The fight with Orochimaru couldn't have been easy, Iruka finally said. No, Naruto replied, still not meeting Iruka's eyes. He said nothing more and silence reigned once again, until Iruka sighed. I'll respect your wish for silence, Naruto, but I want you to know that if at some point you do want to share that with me, you're more than welcome to. Naruto finally looked up to see a small smile on Iruka's face. Thank you, Iruka-sensei, Naruto said, thanking the man for more than just his offer. Naruto could clearly see the indecision in his friend's eyes and wondered how long it would take for Iruka to make up his mind on whether or not to say what was on his mind. Naruto didn't have to wait very long. Why didn't you tell anyone of your plans? Iruka finally asked. It was dangerous for you and Sakura to do this alone. Who would we have told? Naruto countered. We didn't want to take the risk of Tsunade finding out and stopping us. Did Kakashi know? Iruka asked. Naruto shook his head. He wouldn't have let us go through with it if he knew. Iruka nodded in agreement. How did you get back? I can't imagine the fight with Orochimaru leaving either of you in good shape. Jiraiya pulled the truth out of Sakura and he got to us in time. Iruka smiled. I'm glad to know that the old pervert is good for something. Naruto laughed. He's a good guy, when he's on your side. They shared the companionable silence for a good while, until Iruka broke it. What's going to happen now? Sasuke's return is not going to be handled well by any of the villagers, not to mention the other ninja. Resentments tend to run very deep in this village. I know, Naruto replied. We'll just have to deal with it as it comes. What about you? Iruka continued. How are you? Naruto smiled. I'm fine, Iruka-sensei, he automatically replied. Iruka raised a stern eyebrow, like he used to do at the academy when he'd caught Naruto in a lie. Naruto cringed under the scrutiny, feeling like a 10-year-old all over again. Iruka would never lose that power over him, no matter how old Naruto got. I'll be fine, he corrected. What's done is done. There was a note of finality to that statement that seemed to touch something in Iruka, because the man's face suddenly became sad. He stared at Naruto with eyes that made Naruto wish, not for the first time, that he could read what was going on behind them. There's something else, isn't there, Naruto? Now it was Naruto's turn to be caught off guard. During the past 6 years, Naruto had perfected the act of keeping his feelings hidden, so it still surprised him when Iruka was able to read him anyway. Naruto contemplated lying to his friend, but that lasted only for a second or two. Iruka would more than likely read the lie anyway, and he'd be in deeper trouble for it. He took a deep breath to calm himself, and released it slowly. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do now, Naruto finally admitted. Iruka regarded him silently, waiting for Naruto to continue at his own pace. I'm not foolish enough to expect things to go back to the way they were when I was 12. Everything's changed now, Iruka-sensei. I'm not who I was then and Sasuke has been through something that I can't possibly imagine. Naruto paused to fight the guilt that threatened to claw its way to the surface, and the sting of tears in his eyes. Sasuke told Sakura and me that we made a mistake in bringing him back, that we brought back only a shell of what used to be our friend, Naruto added, his voice barely above a whisper. What if he's right? What if we can help him get back to some semblance of normal? What do we do then? Iruka set his cup on the table in front of them, the sound of the porcelain hitting the wood sounding as loud as a gun going off. Do you regret the last 6 years? Iruka finally asked. Do you regret the sacrifices you made in searching for Sasuke? Do you regret defying everything you knew on a reckless risk that could have put all of us in danger? Naruto was speechless for a moment in the wake of Iruka's heartfelt questions. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound issued forth. He had to try a few times before his voice returned to him. Of course I don't regret any of it, Iruka-sensei, Naruto finally replied. I wouldn't take any of it back. There is your answer, Naruto, Iruka replied. Look forward and know that you'll be strong enough to deal with the consequences of your actions. Naruto stared at his teacher, wondering when the man had become so damn wise, before he gave Iruka a small, genuine smile. Iruka patted Naruto's cheek, before ruffling his hair. Stop that, Iruka-sensei, Naruto yelled as he moved away from the offending hand. I'm not a kid anymore, Naruto, you're always going to be a kid in my eyes, Iruka said. How about we go out for an early dinner, my treat? Naruto's smile transformed into a full grin as he jumped off the couch. It's Shiraka, here we come, Naruto said and practically pulled his former teacher off the couch, and out the door. Sasuke found his newfound freedom strange. For the last 3 years, he'd lived in a corner of his mind, watching as someone else lived the life that was supposed to be his. He'd lived for those small moments when he could regain control of his body and participate in the world around him. Sasuke was always punished for the indiscretion, but all of the pain Orochimaru inflicted on him had been worth it, if only to momentarily feel that he was still alive. Now that he was the only resident in his mind, Sasuke found himself still expecting to feel Orochimaru's presence. Twice since he'd left Naruto and his friends, Sasuke thought that he'd felt a trace of Orochimaru still in his mind. In those instances, Sasuke had stood absolutely still and had retreated to his own place in his mind, waiting for the snake to come forth and rage at him for defying him. Nothing had happened and Sasuke had slowly come out of his hiding place and resumed control of his body. The last incident, which had happened as he'd walked by the pier he used to spend so much time sitting on, had left him edgy and confused. What was wrong with him? He was free and back where he was supposed to be. Why couldn't he simply accept that? It shouldn't be this hard, Sasuke whispered to himself as he trudged down the street. He'd spent the last 2 hours wandering around the village, visiting places he'd known well but that now felt alien and unwelcome. After the tension and constant vigilance that he'd had to endure while he'd been in Oto, before Orochimaru had taken over his body, Konoha's relaxed atmosphere made Sasuke want to scream. Why weren't these people more concerned about their welfare? Didn't they understand that someone could come over the walls and kill them at any moment? Sasuke had made the mistake of walking by the academy, and had been rewarded with a barrage of memories that he thought he'd buried long ago. The one that came to the forefront had, interestingly enough, nothing to do with him. Instead, Sasuke had found himself by the empty playground, picturing a much younger Naruto sitting on one of the swings, watching as parents led their children away to their homes. Naruto had never known, but Sasuke had sometimes watched Naruto just sit there with a look of sadness and longing on his face. He'd watched the blonde boy because he'd wondered if that was what his own face had looked like when he walked into his empty house. The moment had been shattered when a little girl had come running by him and promptly tripped over some loose stones, scraping her knees. She started to cry, and Sasuke had reached out to pick her up before he'd realized he'd moved. Before he'd reached her, however, her father had pushed him aside and picked up the child himself. After warning Sasuke not to touch his daughter and telling him a few more choice words, the man had left. Sasuke had decided then that he'd had enough of the village and had headed home. He had not paid attention to what route he'd chosen on his way out of the main part of the village and suddenly found himself in the middle of the shopping district. The street was very crowded and he bumped into a couple of people. As soon as they realized who had bumped into them, their faces had gone white with terror, and they'd quickly moved away from him. The reaction stung more than Sasuke wanted to admit, but he kept his eyes forward and his face impassive. He'd almost made it out of the shopping district when a comment caught his attention and made him stop in the middle of the busy street. Is that who I think it is? Sasuke turned to find a young woman staring at him from in front of a dress shop. Her eyes were wide and she had her hands clasped in front of her chest. Another woman stood beside her, and when she noticed that Sasuke was watching them, she spit in his direction. Yeah, that's the traitor, the second woman said loudly to her companion. He's the one that almost destroyed the village last year. A man exited the small shop next to the one the two women were standing in front of and stopped in his tracks when he noticed Sasuke. What do you want? The man said. Are you here to finish what you started last year? Leave. The fear in the man's eyes, and the contempt in the women's, plucked at a string Sasuke had thought he'd buried when he'd left for Oto. He'd never cared what people thought of him before, but he found that the man's words cut deep and left a gaping wound. Sasuke grit his teeth and turned away from them. A small crowd had formed all around him, and they now pointed at him and whispered amongst themselves. How could the Hokage have let him come back here? A man said. That's just asking for trouble. Why isn't he being punished for what he's done? A woman asked. He shouldn't be allowed to roam the streets like us, another man said. There were no more than 20 people gathered, but Sasuke could see that more were coming to see what the commotion was all about. Deciding that it was time to end this, Sasuke did what he was sure would send them all running. He reached up and unbound the leather tie that held his hair. It cascaded down his back and around his face, and a few people actually gasped. Sasuke, in turn, glared into the crowd. The few people he locked eyes with immediately looked away. You are entitled to think what you want, Sasuke finally said. Without another word, he resumed his walk back to his neighborhood. He didn't quicken his pace. Even though he wanted to get away from the stares he could still feel on him as soon as possible. He felt something warm on his right hand and looked to see that his fingernails had drawn blood when he'd clenched it. He wiped the palm on his black pants, and forced his shoulders to relax and put the encounter out of his mind. He had almost made it out of the village's residential area when he felt them. There were 4 ninja behind him, moving slowly, but definitely after him. They weren't the ANBU that had followed him all day, because Sasuke felt their chakra somewhere ahead of him. The ninja were carefully masking their chakra so all Sasuke felt from them was purpose. They were experienced, if it had taken Sasuke this long to notice them. Sasuke quickened his pace a bit. If there was going to be a confrontation, he wanted it to be out of the residential area and closer to his deserted neighborhood. He had almost made it to the gates of the Uchiha neighborhood when he felt a shuriken arcing towards his head. He turned and easily caught it. You should know better than to give me a weapon, Sasuke said and twirled the shuriken around his finger. 2 ninja appeared in front of him, both dressed in Jounin uniforms and black masks. He felt the other 2 take up positions behind him, and he didn't have to turn around to realize that they, too, were Jounin and had more than likely also concealed their identities. So what are you going to do with that? Impale one of us with it? One of the Jounin in front of him said. Sasuke shrugged. That would be a waste of my time. He threw the shuriken at the man who had spoken, purposely aiming it to go close, but not touch the ninja. He smirked when the man jumped out of the way. He had strict orders from the Hokage not to engage in any spars, fights, or handle any weapons. He was also forbidden from using ninjutsu, genjutsu, the Sharingan, and he was especially forbidden to use his summons. In effect, the Hokage had tied Sasuke's hands behind his back. These ninja were more than likely aware of that, which was why they felt they could approach him out in the open. Since you see fit to walk among the villagers like you've done nothing wrong, we thought we'd show you what we think of traitors around here. Sasuke didn't turn around to see which of the men behind him had spoken. He didn't really care. If these idiots came close to him, he would just leave. They couldn't cross the Uchiha gates, because if they did, Sasuke had a right to defend himself and his property, which he was sure the ninja were well aware of as well. Granted, the property wasn't exactly his, but these idiots probably didn't know that. Suddenly, a 5th chakra signature registered in Sasuke's mind. He barely moved to dodge the attack, when a hand came up out of the ground, grabbed his legs and forced him to his knees. His hands immediately went to perform a seal, but then thought better of it. The other ninja used the opportunity and grabbed his hair, forcing his head back. The ninja put a kunai to Sasuke's throat hard enough to draw blood. Sasuke stood deathly still both to avoid getting cut deeper and to avoid further aggravating the men. We could kill you right now if we wanted, the man whose kunai was at Sasuke's throat said. Then why don't you, Sasuke hissed, the movement causing the kunai to further slice into his throat. Do us all a favor. Sasuke's arms were at his sides and it would take very little to pull the kunai away from the man. However, there were 4 others, including the one that had his hands wrapped around Sasuke's legs. If he extracted himself from the 2 that were holding him, what would the others do? Would they turn even deadlier when fear got the better of them? Does attacking a man that you know can't defend himself make you feel more like a ninja? The voice startled the man holding him and Sasuke could feel the man's body move as he looked for the person that had spoken. Sasuke inwardly groaned at his predicament. Of all the people that could have found them, why did it have to be that old man? Are you on his side? The ninja holding Sasuke said. You would protect a traitor? I'm not protecting anyone, the older man said. I'm sure Sasuke could take the 5 of you out without breaking a sweat, if the Hokage had not given him reasons to do otherwise. I simply find it disgusting that you would resort to something like this. The man's kunai suddenly withdrew from Sasuke's throat, and he was shoved forward. He caught himself with his hands, and by the time he'd gotten to his feet, the 5 ninja were gone. I could have taken care of that, Jiraiya, Sasuke said as he dusted his hands on his pants. I'm sure you would have, Jiraiya replied as he jumped down from the roof he'd been perched on to stand beside Sasuke. Like I said, I find it disgusting that they would take advantage of the Hokage's orders like that. Sasuke shrugged and continued his walk. He pushed his hair out of his face and fished in his pocket for the leather tie. The hair alone freaks them out, Jiraiya commented as he fell into step beside Sasuke. I know, Sasuke replied as he finished the ponytail. Why do you think I haven't had it cut? The two men walked in silence until the Uchiha gates came into view. Where are you going? Sasuke asked as he realized that the hermit had no intention of stopping. What do you mean, where am I going? The man asked. You have been officially made my responsibility, and I am going to make sure that you're not going to be living in a slum. What? Sasuke asked. What do you mean your responsibility? Both men stood outside of the Uchiha neighborhood and glared at each other. Sasuke found his temper raising a notch every minute Jiraiya spent glaring at him in silence. Answer me, Jiraiya sighed. Tsunade has decided that, since I brought you back, you are my responsibility, the man finally said. I'm to make sure that you adhere to the rules she has set forth and to see that you have what you need. Sasuke's eyes narrowed at the man's words, but he fought down the anger that was quickly replacing the annoyance he'd felt when Jiraiya had first appeared. He shouldn't be surprised. It was in the Hokage's best interest to keep a close eye on Sasuke, and who better to do it than her old teammate? Kakashi knows me better, Sasuke said. He's better suited to watch me. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow in amusement. Kakashi didn't drag your, and Naruto's, sorry ass back here and then drag Tsunade and Shizen out of bed so that they could heal you. In Tsunade's eyes, that makes you my responsibility. What about Naruto? Isn't he already your responsibility? Sasuke asked, looking for any excuse to get this man away from him as soon as possible. Orochimaru's memories of this man were warring with his own, limited ones, and Sasuke was afraid that if Jiraiya didn't leave soon, he was going to let something slip. Naruto has come a long way from when you knew him, Jiraiya said, unmistakable pride in his voice. He doesn't need me to watch him. You, however, do. The explanation only worked to incense Sasuke further. I'm not a child in need of constant attention, Sasuke countered. When I was, no one was around to give it. Sasuke shut his mouth with a click as soon as that last phrase had left it. What the hell was wrong with him? The man standing in front of him could care less about his sorry past, and Sasuke had thought that he'd long ago buried the childish feelings surrounding his clan's massacre. Jiraiya examined him for a moment, leaving Sasuke feeling exposed and making him feel very small. Well, kid, you have that attention now, Jiraiya said and entered the Uchiha neighborhood ahead of Sasuke, who had no choice but to follow him. The sound of glass shattering echoed off the walls of the kitchen, making Sakura jump. Damn it! She yelled as she took a step back to avoid the soup that she just spilled all over her floor. She took her apron off and threw it over the mess to contain it while she got her cleaning supplies out of the closet. As she rummaged for the mop, she heard someone knocking on the front door. Come it's open! She yelled, hoping that whoever it was heard her. When she had what she needed, she turned around and shrieked when she almost ran into someone. Geez, you're jumpy this evening, Ino said. You scared me, Ino. Ino put her hands on her hips and stared at Sakura. You told me to come in. Sakura sighed and went about picking up the mess she'd made on the floor. The soup had ended up really good, too, Sakura said, bemoaning the loss of the dish she'd spent hours making. Are you expecting company, Sakura? It looks like you're cooking for an army. Sakura shrugged sheepishly. You're the only one I'm expecting, Ino, but I was going to stop by Naruto's later and take him and Sasuke some food. Sakura returned to the remaining dishes, pointedly ignoring the look Ino gave her. The two women remained quiet for a moment, until Ino broke the silence. How long were you planning on keeping it a secret? Ino asked, and Sakura winced at the betrayal she heard in her friend's voice. Sakura sighed. She had expected Ino to be the first to stop by, and her longtime friend hadn't disappointed her. If anything, Sakura was surprised that Ino hadn't grilled her while they'd been at Ichiraku earlier. We couldn't tell anyone, Ino, it was too risky. It was Ino's turn to sigh. The young woman pulled out a stool and sat down at the small table where Sakura was chopping vegetables. Sakura felt the woman's eyes on her, and it unnerved her that Ino just wouldn't say what was on her mind. I wouldn't have told anyone, Ino finally said. Sakura put the knife down on the chopping board harder than she'd intended, which made Ino wince. She took a few breaths to calm herself. Why did talking to Ino always have to feel like an inquisition? It wasn't a matter of you saying anything or not, Ino, Sakura said. We couldn't tell anyone, not until we either accomplished what we wanted or failed miserably. Silence reigned once again, but it was Sakura who broke it this time. Naruto would have paid the price if we'd failed, since he went alone. Guilt washed over her, as it always did when she thought about the fact that she'd agreed to the plan regardless of the consequences. Naruto had succeeded, but if he'd failed, Sakura didn't even want to think about that. Why, Sakura? Ino asked. After all of this time, why still go after him? Sakura fought the anger the questions brought, because they weren't new and she knew that anger would have no effect on Ino anyway. The woman was stubborn and had known Sakura long enough to know how to deal with her. Besides, this wasn't a conversation that either of them hadn't had before, except that this time, bringing Sasuke back was a reality, not a hopeless dream. If Shikamaru or Choji were in trouble, you'd go after them, right? Sakura asked. Not if they turned traitor, Ino quickly responded. Sakura's smile was bitter when she regarded her friend. You say that now, Ino, but if it ever actually happened, you'd be hard-pressed to stick to your words, even if a childish crush was not involved. Ino returned the stare for a moment, but broke it off a moment later. She placed her hands on top of the table, and Sakura could see that they were shaking slightly. Sasuke was our teammate, Sakura said, answering Ino's earlier question. He was our responsibility, and we just couldn't let him go. So what happens now? You saw yourself how the villagers reacted to him. You and Naruto have brought him back to a village where he'll be feared and scorned, and you too will be hated and scorned because of it. The knife that had been in Sakura's hand suddenly wasn't, and Ino turned to see that it had been embedded in the nearest wall. What would you have had us do? Leave him with Orochimaru to be used, and move on like he was never a part of our lives? Ino opened her mouth to reply, but Sakura cut her off. I know that he made a choice to leave, Ino. Why does everyone keep telling us that? Are Naruto and I the only ones that still believe in loyalty to a teammate, a friend? Sakura slumped into the nearest stool and rested her head on her hands. Tears threatened to spill, but she fought them off. She'd cried enough already, and she would not give Ino the satisfaction of seeing her cry now. The tense silence was broken by Ino's chuckle. You're as stubborn as ever, Haruno, the young woman said, and you have my support. I just hope that you're ready for the heartache that is going to come from this. Sakura raised her head and found her friend smiling fondly at her. Naruto and I wouldn't have done it if we weren't willing to pay the price. The conversation was interrupted by a rather urgent knock on the door. I'll get it, Ino said and left Sakura alone in the kitchen to gather her thoughts and pull herself together. She pulled the knife she'd thrown out of the wall, washed it, and resumed chopping vegetables. Voices from the living room caught her attention. She wasn't expecting anyone and most people that stopped by called her first. Who would be coming now? Slow down, you idiot, Ino shouted from the living room. You're going to break something. Sakura frowned, but before she could ask who Ino was talking to, she found herself face to face with Rock Lee, Choji, Shikamaru, Yamaguchi Akira, and Takahashi Kumiko. What the hell are you all doing here? Sakura asked, rather annoyed at the unexpected company. Don't you people know to call ahead? Shikamaru rolled his eyes and strolled over to the other end of the kitchen and sat himself on the small window seat. Choji had made his way to the stove to smell what she was cooking, while Lee had come to stand directly in front of her. It was Lee who finally spoke. Is it true? Is Uchiha Sasuke really back? Lee asked. We just got back from our mission and heard the news, Kumiko, Lee's teammate and fellow medic ninja said. That's just weird, Akira, Lee's other teammate added. I've never met the guy, but the whole damn town is talking about it, Sakura sighed. Why didn't you go bug Naruto instead? She asked. Lee's eyes widened. Why would we, when we know you so much better? He asked and winked at her. Naruto wasn't at his apartment, Shikamaru said. We went there first. Resigned, Sakura threw the vegetables she chopped into the frying pan. Choji, make the rice so I can feed all of these people. Choji did as asked and in no time, the two of them had dinner prepared. So much for the food she was going to take Naruto and Sasuke. Let's eat, Sakura said as she shoved everyone into the dining room. You can ask all the questions you want then. Shikamaru, who was the last one to leave the kitchen, stopped beside her. I tried to discourage them from coming, but they were curious, he said. It's okay, Shikamaru, they're here. They might as well hear the truth before they start believing the rumors. Sakura took a deep breath and prepared herself the long evening ahead. Are we certain that it was a ninja from Konoha? Yukio, the leader of Kirigakure's ANBU, was quick with his reply. It wasn't just any ninja from Konoha, my lord. It was Kakashi the copy ninja. The Mizukage was immediately on alert. Why would Konoha send Kakashi unless they're planning an attack? The man asked. They might have been warned of our recent movements, and have sent the copy ninja to confirm what they'd heard, Hisato, the Mizukage's closest advisor replied. If that is the case, they will soon be on alert. The Mizukage stood and paced the length of his office. According to our information, Konoha has still not recovered from the attack from Oto last year, he said. They are defenseless while all they have for protection is snot-nosed genin. If we are to take advantage of the situation, we should do so right now. They have the vessel of the nine-tailed fox, Yukio pointed out. He's a formidable ninja, if the reports are to be believed. He can be taken out first, Hisato stated. From what I've seen in the reports, the boy lives on the outskirts of the village, in a sparsely populated area. If we can get over the wall at a point closest to him, we should have little difficulty in getting rid of him. The Mizukage nodded his agreement. Yukio, put together a small, but highly specialized squad. While you are away, we will prepare our forces and head for Konoha. We will meet there. Yukio grinned as he bowed to his leader. I will do as you ask with pleasure, my lord. I will have my squad ready for inspection first thing in the morning. The Mizukage nodded and dismissed the two men. When they were gone, he headed for the windows that lined his office and he studied the water that surrounded them. His village had been in the shadows for far too long, and he finally had the resources to do something about it. Konoha was weak, and if he succeeded in conquering it, it would send word to the other hidden villages that they were not to be opposed. If he were fortunate enough, he might even be able to negotiate a treaty with Otogakure. The Mizukage smiled. Patience was a virtue that many men lacked, but one that would bring him glory very soon. What if Naruto take Jiraiya talk seriously, forget about Sasuke? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.